The certainty illusion. You're absolutely sure. You know you're right. Maybe it's about politics, or morality, or someone who wronged you years ago. You feel the heat of truth in your chest. That grounded sense of clarity that makes you shake your head when others disagree. You don't just believe it. You feel it. And that feeling, so convincing, so vivid, must mean it's real, right? This is the certainty illusion. It's the cognitive mirage that convinces you your beliefs are true simply because they feel certain. It's the quiet, undetectable error where your brain confuses emotional conviction for objective truth. And you're not alone. This illusion is built into all of us, deeply, invisibly, powerfully. Let's break this down. The brain doesn't just store facts. It attaches feelings to those facts. When you form a belief about the world, about yourself, about someone else, that belief isn't encoded as neutral data. It's wrapped in sensations. If you've ever said, "I just know it's true," that feeling of knowing is not a logical process, it's an emotional one. Certainty is felt before it is explained. This is because beliefs, especially deeply held ones, are integrated with the brain's limbic system, your emotional machinery. The anterior insula, the amygdala, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, these areas light up not when we analyze, but when we feel right. Studies show that the more emotionally charged a belief is, the more confidently it is held, even in the face of contradictory evidence. This means your brain is wired to defend what feels certain, not what's been proven. And here's where it gets dangerous. Feeling certain feels identical to being right. The sensation of correctness doesn't come with a built-in truth filter. When you're certain, your body calms. Your brain releases dopamine. Your cognitive load drops. Your muscles relax. You feel confident, grounded, maybe even righteous. But none of this tells you whether you're actually right. It only tells you your brain has decided to stop questioning. Think of it like a security system that signals all clear, not when danger is gone, but when it feels gone. And this leads to an astonishing realization. Your beliefs may feel most certain precisely when they are least examined. In experiments, people were asked to rate how confident they were in their answers to general knowledge questions. When they were wrong, they still often reported high certainty, sometimes more than when they were right.
Why?
Because confidence wasn't tracking accuracy. It was tracking emotional comfort. Certainty isn't a conclusion. It's a state. Now add in social identity, confirmation bias, and tribal thinking, and the illusion deepens. You're more likely to feel certain when a belief aligns with your group. When your community echoes it. When it's been repeated 1,000 times. Familiarity breeds conviction. The more often you hear a belief, even if it's false, the more right it feels. This is called the illusory truth effect. And it's terrifyingly effective. That feeling of course that's true, that snap judgment, that mental nod, it's not proof. It's a brain shortcut. A fast path to coherence. Because doubt is metabolically expensive. Certainty is easy, clean, addictive. And so we crave it. We mistake certainty for intelligence. We seek out people who make us feel sure. We reward conviction over nuance. In politics, in leadership, in faith, in debate. The loudest voice isn't always the wisest, but we often listen to it as if it is, because it makes us feel certain. But here's the catch. Certainty can kill curiosity. It can paralyze growth. When you're sure you're right, you stop listening. You stop learning. The belief becomes a wall instead of a bridge. It calcifies into identity. And when challenged, you feel not just questioned, but attacked. This is why facts often fail to change minds. Not because people lack information, but because facts don't feel like certainty. Emotion does. So what can we do? The answer isn't to abandon belief. It's to hold belief lightly. To separate the feeling of being right from the truth of being right. To notice when certainty surges, and ask, what is this certainty made of? Try this. Next time you feel certain, pause. Don't reject the belief, but inspect the feeling. Where is it in your body? Does it feel warm? Solid? Protective? Does it spike when challenged? Does it settle when agreed with? These questions won't erase the belief, but they'll help you see the scaffolding behind it. You'll begin to notice when certainty is inherited, not earned. When it's emotional armor, not intellectual clarity. And something beautiful happens when you stop worshipping certainty. You become more humble, more open, more fluid. You stop needing to win every mental battle. You start noticing nuance. You make space for contradiction. And in that space, real intelligence begins. Not the intelligence of always being right, but the wisdom of knowing you might be wrong. This doesn't make you weaker. It makes you safer. Because the people most vulnerable to manipulation, to conspiracy, to extremism, are not the uncertain. They are the certain. Certain of their superiority. Certain of their purity. Certain of their truth. And behind that certainty, a gaping blind spot. But you can do differently. You can feel certainty and still ask questions. You can honor conviction without mistaking it for proof. You can walk through life knowing that the map you carry is never the full territory. That truth rarely screams. It whispers. And certainty, more often than not, is just the echo of your own voice, calling back from the cave of belief. So be brave enough to doubt what feels most solid. Because sometimes, the feeling of being right is the very thing keeping you from what is right. The spotlight bias. You walk into a room and instantly feel it. The weight of every eye. You adjust your clothes. Check your posture. That awkward moment from earlier loops in your head. Something you said wrong, something you wore, something you wish you could take back. You're convinced they noticed. That they're still thinking about it. Still judging you. But here's the truth. They're not. They didn't see it. Or if they did, they forgot it faster than you imagined. Because most people in that room are doing exactly what you're doing, worrying that you noticed them. This is the spotlight bias. And it's one of the most quietly devastating illusions we live under. The spotlight bias is the belief that others notice you, your mistakes, your flaws, your awkwardness, far more than they actually do. It's the feeling of being watched, measured, remembered. But in reality, people are rarely paying close attention. They're too absorbed in their own internal spotlight. You think you're on stage. But everyone else thinks they are too. This was tested in one of psychology's most quietly brilliant experiments. Researchers asked students to wear an embarrassingly bright t-shirt, featuring Barry Manilow, a pop singer few of them liked, and enter a room full of other students. The question was simple. How many people will notice? The students wearing the shirt estimated that nearly half the room would remember what they wore. But the actual number? Closer to 10%. Almost no one noticed. Because they were too busy thinking about themselves. And that's the heart of it. We are not being scrutinized as much as we believe. But we live as if we are. We replay that awkward conversation. We obsess over a minor typo in a message. We hesitate to speak, to act, to try, because someone might see us fail. But in truth, most people don't see. And those who do, they don't care for long. And those who care, they'll forget. Or they're judging from the same fragile spotlight that you are. Because the bias isn't just in your mind, it's everywhere. Everyone's carrying it. Everyone's afraid they're being watched, measured, remembered. Everyone's afraid they don't belong. That they said too much. That they laughed too loud. That they stood out in the wrong way. But the real tragedy, the spotlight bias holds us back from being human. From laughing freely. From admitting we're lost. From taking risks and stumbling and saying, I don't know. We armor ourselves. We script our words. We rehearse our apologies for mistakes no one even noticed. We overthink because we overimagine the audience. And we forget that the only spotlight is the one we shine on ourselves. This has consequences. People avoid applying for jobs they want because they imagine being mocked for failing. People skip social events because they picture others whispering about how they look. People stay quiet during meetings or conversations because they're convinced any mistake will echo forever. But the silence that follows, that's not shame. That's missed growth, missed joy, missed connection. Because while you're shrinking under the imagined spotlight, others are too. And what they need isn't your perfection. It's your presence. It's your honesty. Your humanity. Your ability to shrug and say, yeah, I messed that up, and keep going. Because confidence isn't about being flawless under the spotlight. It's about realizing the spotlight isn't even there. At least not in the way you think. Ask yourself this: what mistake did your closest friend make last week? What awkward thing did a coworker say yesterday? What strange shirt did someone wear to that last gathering? You don't remember. You barely noticed. Not because you don't care, but because you were focused on your own spotlight. Your own story. Everyone is. And that means freedom. Because once you understand this, you begin to move differently. You stop waiting to be judged. You stop flinching from every stumble. You stop replaying moments that no one else remembers. You speak more freely. You risk more often. You step forward, not because you know you'll be perfect, but because you know most people are too busy worrying about their own imperfections to notice yours. The spotlight bias isn't about arrogance. It's about fear. The fear of being seen too clearly. But most of the time, we are not being seen at all. And that can feel lonely. Until you realize it's also liberating. Because if they're not watching, then you can try. You can experiment. You can live a little louder, messier, more honestly. You can stop editing your every gesture and start living in the moment that actually matters, the one you're in now. So next time you feel the spotlight on your back, take a breath. Look around. Notice the 1,000 other little spotlights, each one pointed inward, not outward. And realize, they're not watching you. They're just like you. Which means the fear that holds you back was never real. The spotlight was an illusion. And you're finally free to walk out of it. The mirror mistake. You look in the mirror and believe it's telling you the truth. Not just about your face, your posture, your age, but something deeper. You believe it confirms who you are. How you come across. What others must see when they look at you. But the real mistake isn't in the glass. The real mistake is in your mind. Because when you think about yourself, you think you're being objective. You believe your self-perception is a reflection, a neutral, honest read of who you are. But it isn't. It's an illusion. A guess. A distortion filtered through memory, fear, desire, and old emotional noise. And yet, because it feels internal, private, and unspoken, you assume it must be accurate. This is the mirror mistake, the belief that your thoughts about yourself reflect reality, when they're often just the residue of past wounds and imagined judgments. It starts early. You absorb the voices around you. Parents, teachers, friends. Some of them praised you. Some of them criticized you. But more often than not, the loudest ones were the ones you misinterpreted. A teacher frowns, and your brain records it as failure. A friend forgets to call, and you label it rejection. Over time, these tiny moments calcify into beliefs. I'm not enough. I talk too much. I'm awkward. I'm always too emotional. And those beliefs become your mirror. But the brain is lazy. Once it believes something, it filters the world through that belief. It edits evidence to match the story. You might give a brilliant presentation and still walk away thinking you sounded fake. You might receive love and still feel unwanted. Because your internal mirror isn't reflecting, it's warping. And here's the worst part. This mirror lives inside your thoughts, so you have no distance from it. You don't say, I'm thinking I'm a failure. You say, I am a failure. You don't say, my brain is offering me the idea that I'm unlikable. You say, people just don't like me. The thought becomes truth. The guess becomes fact. The distortion becomes identity. Even memory plays along. Your brain is biased to remember moments that support your self-image. If you believe you're clumsy, you'll recall every time you tripped. If you believe you're boring, you'll forget the moments people lit up around you. Your memory curates your past to preserve the illusion of accuracy. But it's only preserving the illusion of familiarity, not truth. The result? You live in a prison made of reflections, none of them real, all of them convincing. And you're not alone. Nearly everyone you meet is doing the same thing, projecting their distorted mirrors outward. The confident man might secretly believe he's faking everything. The quiet girl might be full of brilliance she never dares to speak. The people you admire most may go home and shatter inside their own mirror rooms, convinced they're frauds. Because self-awareness isn't the same as accuracy. You can be deeply introspective and still be completely wrong about yourself. In fact, the more analytical your mind is, the better it may be at defending its distortions. You've practiced rehearsing your flaws. You've built arguments to justify them. And like any good lawyer, your inner critic knows how to win even a false case if it controls the evidence. So how do you escape? You don't shatter the mirror. You notice it. You name it. You start saying things like, "My brain is telling me I'm a burden right now." Not, "I am a burden." That tiny shift cracks the glass. It creates space. Suddenly, the reflection is just that, a surface image, not the truth beneath it. And you ask, where did this thought come from? Who first told me this? Is this me, or is this old programming I've been looping unconsciously for years? Sometimes, the moment you ask, you realize the mirror isn't even yours. It belonged to someone else. A parent who never healed. A peer who projected their own fear onto you. A culture that told you silence is strength, or that softness is weakness. The more you question the mirror, the more invisible you become to its trap. You start to see the ways your brain scans the world for evidence of shame, failure, not enoughness, and how often it gets it wrong. You realize that one awkward laugh doesn't mean you're unlikable. That one moment of fear doesn't mean you're broken. That one missed opportunity doesn't mean you're behind. You learn to doubt the voice inside your head, not because it's always lying, but because it's always interpreting. And interpretation is not truth. It's habit. And habits can be rewritten. But that takes time, patience, curiosity, self-compassion. Because the mirror mistake isn't something you outthink. It's something you outgrow, by repeatedly choosing not to trust the first reflection, by learning to pause before believing the worst, and by reminding yourself, again and again, that you are more than what your mind predicts about you. You are not your thoughts. You are not your assumptions. You are not your mirror. You are the one who sees the mirror, and that awareness, however quiet, is your first glimpse of truth. The frozen first impression. You meet someone for the first time. Maybe it's a glance, a handshake, a short conversation. And in those opening seconds, something clicks. Or doesn't. You decide, without deciding, what kind of person they are. Whether you trust them. Whether you like them. Whether they matter. And from that instant forward, your brain does something strange. It freezes the impression. This is the frozen first impression, a cognitive trap so subtle, so pervasive, that it silently shapes who you trust, what you remember, and even how you define truth itself. You might think you're open-minded, that you give people the benefit of the doubt, that your opinions evolve with new information. But neuroscience says otherwise, because the brain doesn't crave truth. It craves certainty, and the first impression provides just enough information to feel confident, whether or not it's accurate. This is known in psychology as the primacy effect. We overweight the first data point, the first trait, the first headline. It doesn't matter what comes after. The first impression becomes the lens through which all future impressions are filtered. A study at Princeton found that people form lasting judgments about trustworthiness, competence, and likability from a face in just 100 milliseconds. Not from behavior. Not from conversation. Just a face. And what's more terrifying? Those snap judgments predicted real-world outcomes, like who gets hired, who gets elected, who gets ignored. And once that first impression sets in, your mind starts defending it. You notice confirming evidence and ignore contradictions. You say things like, "I had a feeling about them," even if the feeling was based on almost nothing. You laugh when you're proven right, but rarely notice when you're proven wrong, because the brain quietly discards data that doesn't fit the original mold. This doesn't just apply to people. It applies to ideas. You read one article, watch one video, hear one explanation, and suddenly that's your baseline. Every new insight has to fight through the force field of that first exposure. Even if it's false. Even if it's outdated. Even if it was just someone's opinion. That's how misinformation spreads. Not because it's persuasive, but because it gets there first. This effect becomes more dangerous the more confident you are. If you believe you're a great judge of character, your brain will freeze that first impression even harder, because now your identity is attached to it. To revise your opinion would feel like admitting you're wrong. So instead, you rationalize. You bend logic to fit the snapshot. We do this in relationships. We fall for someone's charm, their voice, their style. We imagine who they are. And once that picture's painted, we protect it. Red flags get reframed as quirks. Warnings become exceptions. Because that first feeling felt so true, how could it be wrong? And we do it in reverse. One awkward comment, one strange habit, one missed cue, and a person gets categorized. Too intense. Not my type. A little off. And from then on, we only notice what reinforces that belief. We lock someone in a mental box they never chose, and throw away the key. The tragedy is, people change. Ideas evolve. Depth takes time. But the frozen first impression never allows for time. It wants clarity now. It trades depth for speed. And we call it intuition. But real intuition grows slowly. It's informed by presence, attention, revision. The frozen kind, that's just fast bias dressed up as wisdom. In a world where everything is accelerating, where swipes, likes, headlines, and hot takes dominate, this trap becomes even deadlier. We form opinions about people we've never met, countries we've never visited, cultures we don't understand, based on one photo, one tweet, one story, and then we stick to it, because to admit we misjudged would feel like losing something. But you're not losing truth. You're losing illusion. The most dangerous first impressions are the ones you don't know you've made, the ones that operate silently. A coworker you avoid, a book you never opened, a thought you never explored, because the first impression didn't spark interest. But maybe, if you looked again, something deeper would emerge. And that's the only way out of this trap: awareness. Ask yourself, what's my frozen impression of this person, this idea, this place, this belief? Did I ever update it? Or did I just hold on? We assume the first truth is the real one, that the gut feeling is sacred. But what if the first truth is just the loudest, the fastest, the one that got there before we knew better? And what if, by freezing it, we stopped ourselves from ever knowing better? Because behind every shallow judgment is a complexity waiting to be seen. Behind every dismissed face is a story we never asked for. Behind every false certainty is a truth we never stayed long enough to hear. So unfreeze. Look again. Let the moment breathe. Because the first impression may feel real. But only time reveals what's true. The evidence filter. You think you're rational. You think you weigh facts. You think you listen to both sides and form opinions based on evidence. But here's the quiet truth. You don't. Not fully. You live behind a filter. A filter so invisible, so automatic, that you don't even know it's there. It lets in what agrees with you. It shuts out what doesn't. And it whispers to your brain, you were right all along. This is the evidence filter. A built-in cognitive bias that distorts how you interpret reality, not by adding lies, but by choosing which truths to notice. You don't just interpret facts selectively. You see them selectively. Your attention, memory, and perception itself are tilted in favor of what you already believe. And the most dangerous part, you're not doing it on purpose. Let's break it down. Imagine two people reading the exact same article. One believes the government is corrupt. The other trusts institutions. The article criticizes a new policy. The first person nods. See? Proof. The second says, they're exaggerating. Where's the full context? Same article. Different takeaways. Because they're not reading the text, they're reading through the filter of prior belief. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but it goes deeper than opinions. It alters perception at the most fundamental level. When you scan the environment, your brain is flooded with more data than it can process. So it prioritizes what's relevant to your existing model of the world. You don't see everything. You see what fits. This is not laziness. It's a survival adaptation. Imagine early humans. If your brain had to reevaluate everything from scratch each time you encountered a threat, you'd hesitate and die. So evolution favored minds that could lock onto patterns quickly and then defend them. The cost. Once an idea is installed, your brain starts building walls around it. You start collecting only the evidence that confirms your view. You start avoiding sources that challenge it. You remember hits, forget misses. You even interpret ambiguity in ways that validate your beliefs. You turn noise into signal, but only if the signal flatters what you already think. And here's where it turns tragic. The smarter you are, the worse it gets. Why? Because intelligence gives you more tools to justify your beliefs. You can cherry-pick more efficiently, argue more convincingly, rationalize contradictions. You become a defense attorney for your worldview, not a judge. The better your mind works, the more elegant your self-deception becomes. And soon, you live in a self-reinforcing loop. You seek what supports you. You find it. You feel validated. So you seek more. So you find more. So you dig deeper. And all the while, you become more confident. Not because you're more correct, but because you've filtered out anything that could correct you. This happens in science, in politics, in religion, in relationships, in your own self-concept. A person who believes they're unlovable will interpret neutral expressions as rejection. A person who believes they're gifted will reinterpret criticism as jealousy. And both will swear they're just being objective. You may think you're open-minded. But ask yourself this: when was the last time you truly changed your mind on something important? Not waffled. Not adjusted slightly. But shattered a belief. Dismantled it. Rebuilt it from the other side. If that feels rare, uncomfortable, even threatening, it's not your fault. It's your filter doing its job. But here's the catch. The filter doesn't just protect you. It also limits you. When you ignore disconfirming evidence, you don't grow. You stay locked in a shrinking world where only agreeable truths survive. Your model of reality becomes brittle, fragile, unable to accommodate complexity. You start confusing confidence with accuracy. And when the world finally presents something undeniable, you crack. So how do you break the filter? Not by removing it, you can't. But by noticing it. Every time you feel an automatic yes to something that confirms your view, pause. Ask, would I be as convinced if this supported the opposite? Every time you feel anger at a counterpoint, ask, what would I believe if I had grown up on the other side of this? Seek out strong versions of opposing arguments, not strawmen. Read things that disturb you. Don't just tolerate disagreement, study it. Not to win, to stretch. Because outside your filter is not just danger. There's insight, growth, clarity, humility, and above all, freedom. Because a mind that can only see what it already agrees with is not free. It's a cage with glass walls, beautiful, reinforced, and invisible. But a mind that can question its own reflexes, that can hold contradiction, that can admit it was wrong not with shame, but with curiosity, that mind becomes a mirror that reflects the world as it is, not just as it feels. So the next time you read something that proves you right, or wrong, or confused, don't react. Observe. Your filter just fired. Now you get to choose. Will you reinforce the world you already believe in? Or will you let a new world in? The story completion. You remember what happened, or at least, you think you do. You recall the scene in vivid detail, the way someone looked at you, the exact words they said, the color of the sky, the emotion in your chest. It feels complete, solid, yours. But here's the unsettling truth. Parts of that memory were never there. Your brain filled in the blanks. Not out of malice. Not because it wants to lie. But because it needs to make sense of things. It can't tolerate gaps. And when your mind encounters missing pieces, whether in memory, perception, or understanding, it doesn't pause. It invents. It improvises. And you, unknowingly, believe the fiction. This is the story completion, a cognitive sleight of hand so seamless that most people go their entire lives without realizing they're doing it. Let's make this real. Imagine a childhood memory. You're at a birthday party. You remember the cake, the candles, the faces, the laughter. But years later, someone shows you a photo, and there's a person in the frame you swear wasn't there. or a different cake than the one you were sure you saw. And yet, the memory felt complete. That feeling of completeness is the illusion. Because your brain doesn't retrieve memories like files from a cabinet. It reconstructs them, on the spot, using fragments of sensory input, emotion, and narrative expectation. If a piece is missing, it fills it in with what should have been there. A plausible sound. A typical reaction. A logical next moment. And once it's filled, it feels true. This doesn't just happen with memory. It happens with perception too. In visual cognition, your brain routinely fills in your blind spot, the part of your retina where no visual data comes in. You don't notice a hole in your vision because your brain uses surrounding information to patch it. Seamlessly. Invisibly. You see something that's not there, and you don't even know it. That same mechanism works in your thoughts. When someone tells you a story with missing details, your mind completes it. If they say, "He stormed out of the room," you picture the emotion, the door slamming, the facial expression, none of which may have happened. But the scene feels whole, because your brain wrote the missing script. And in memory, it's even more deceptive. Studies show that when people are told false details after witnessing an event, like the color of a car or the presence of a weapon, they often later remember those details vividly, even though they never occurred. This is called the misinformation effect, and it's not rare. It's universal. It happens to you. But here's the deeper twist. The brain doesn't know it's lying. It believes the completed story. Once the gap is filled, the fiction becomes indistinguishable from truth. The neurons firing for a made-up memory are often identical to those firing for a real one. And because memory is reconstructive, the more you recall a story, the more it changes, until the original is gone, overwritten by edits you didn't know you made. Your sense of identity, your entire life narrative, is shaped by these completions. That argument you remember having, the way someone hurt you, the first time you fell in love, those memories may contain invented details that feel more real than what actually happened. And this isn't just about events. It's about motives, meanings. You fill in why people did what they did. Why you did what you did. You explain your past self with present knowledge. You assume intention where there was confusion. You add coherence to a life that was far messier than it now appears. This is how the brain protects you, from ambiguity, from chaos, from emotional dissonance. It wraps confusion in narrative. It gives pain a backstory. It gives trauma a clean outline. But in doing so, it writes fiction that you live as fact. And this has consequences. It means that when you argue with someone about what really happened, you might both be wrong, and both believe you're right. You're not lying. You're remembering a constructed story your brain completed long ago. It means that when you reflect on your life, you may be trusting scenes that never occurred. Dialogues that never happened. Motivations you only imagined. And yet they feel like truth, because they're wired into your neurons like truth. It means that much of your suffering may be built on illusions. That the pain you relive might be stitched together from fragments and guesses your mind mistook for certainty. And that healing may begin not by uncovering the real story, but by realizing how unreliable any story can be. So what can you do? You can start by doubting the feeling of completeness. When a memory feels vivid, ask yourself, what parts do I actually recall? And what parts just make the story feel right? You can notice how often you explain others' actions with imagined motives. When someone disappoints you, ask, do I know what they felt, or am I filling in the silence with a version that makes sense to me? You can admit that your memories evolve. That the story of you is a living document, edited, trimmed, rephrased. And that's not weakness. That's humanity. Because while the story completion illusion deceives us, it also defines us. It allows us to move forward. To find meaning in the mess. To feel whole, even when our experiences were fragmented. It's not a glitch. It's a gift wrapped in error. But you must see it clearly. Because the danger lies in mistaking the story for the truth. In defending the fiction as fact. In building identity on foundations that never quite existed. And the power lies in knowing the story is yours to edit. You will never escape your brain's need to complete what's missing. But you can become aware. You can hold your memories more gently. Your judgments more loosely. Your stories more honestly. Because what you remember may not be what happened. But how you live with that truth, that's where meaning begins. The random meaning, you look up at the clouds and see a face. A soft outline, eyes, nose, a crooked smile. You blink, and it's gone. But for a moment, it felt real. Like something was trying to speak to you through the sky. Like meaning had surfaced from the noise. It hadn't. That face didn't exist. But your brain told you it did. This is the random meaning. And it shapes how you understand everything. You think you're seeing reality. You're not. You're seeing patterns. Your brain is a pattern machine. A relentless storyteller. It takes randomness, shadows, static, coincidences, chaos, and weaves narrative. It connects dots that were never meant to be connected. It searches for intention in the void. And the scariest part? It does it automatically. Not because you want to. Because you have to. This phenomenon has a name: apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random data. It's not rare. It's universal. It's why gamblers believe in hot streaks. It's why people see omens in tea leaves, in numbers, in dreams. It's why we hear voices in white noise, faces in burn marks, messages in static. It's why we feel that a coincidence must mean something. It's not a flaw. It's a feature. An evolutionary defense mechanism. In the ancient world, recognizing patterns, real or imagined, could mean the difference between life and death. Better to mistake rustling grass for a predator and survive, than to assume randomness and die. The cost of a false positive was low. The cost of a false negative? Catastrophic. So the brain evolved to err on the side of meaning. And that bias stayed. Now, we spot meaning everywhere. Not because it's real, but because it feels real. Because our brains were built to survive, not to see truth. Think about this. You see someone 3 times in 1 week, someone you hadn't thought about in years. You feel the chill of fate. You think, what are the chances? You ask if the universe is trying to tell you something. It isn't. It's just coincidence. But that explanation feels insufficient. Because your brain doesn't want randomness. It craves story. It demands cause. It needs purpose. So it invents one. This is the random meaning. And it's everywhere. We build religions around it. We create conspiracy theories with it. We tie moments of grief, joy, terror, and coincidence into elaborate webs of signs and synchronicities. We make gods out of noise. Not because we're irrational, but because our biology refuses to accept the void. Even scientists fall for it. Data gets cherry-picked. Graphs get interpreted through emotional filters. A signal appears in the noise, and suddenly a theory is born. But sometimes, there is no signal. Sometimes, the noise is just noise. But we can't leave it alone. We search. We impose. We sculpt shapes in the chaos. Even if the clay is smoke. Even if the story costs us our peace. Here's where it gets darker. This bias toward meaning isn't just cognitive, it's emotional. When we're anxious, lonely, grieving, we become more vulnerable to random meaning. We want the universe to speak. We need it to. So we start hearing it in the smallest coincidences. The song that played right after the phone call. The crow that landed on the windowsill. The flickering of a light. They aren't messages. But we need them to be. Because in pain, randomness feels cruel. So we rewrite the chaos into comfort. We give it form. And in doing so, we give ourselves a reason to keep going. That's the paradox. Random meaning can trap you in illusions. But it can also save you. Because sometimes, even a false meaning is better than none at all. Sometimes, it gives you just enough faith to take the next step. To survive. To rebuild. But there's danger here too. Because meaning made from randomness can breed delusion. It can fuel paranoia. Make you believe you're chosen, or hunted. That everything is personal. That every bad day, every strange glance, every unlucky break is part of some cosmic design. And if you believe that long enough, your world becomes smaller. Tighter. Less flexible. Less kind. Because in a world where everything means something, nothing is safe. Not even coincidence. So where's the balance? It begins with awareness. Recognizing that your mind is wired to see meaning where none exists. That not every flicker is a signal. That not every coincidence is fate. That sometimes life is just random. And that's okay. Because randomness doesn't mean meaninglessness. You can give things meaning consciously. You can choose which patterns to believe in. You can make your own constellations, out of stars that mean nothing on their own, but shine brighter when you draw the lines. Because meaning isn't something you find. It's something you make. And that might be the most human thing of all. The ability to take the noise and write a song. To take the chaos and tell a story. Even when you know the pattern might not be real. Even when you understand, the meaning is yours alone. That's the random meaning. And it's not a flaw in your perception. It's the signature of your mind trying to matter. The fairness bias. There's a quiet rule your brain clings to, even when the world screams the opposite. A belief so deep you rarely name it, yet it shapes your anger, your sorrow, your confusion. It's this, that life should be fair. That good should be rewarded. That bad should be punished. That effort should equal outcome. That the world, at some fundamental level, should make moral sense. But it doesn't. And when it doesn't, when the liar wins, when the kind get hurt, when cruelty goes unpunished, your whole nervous system recoils. Not just because it's painful, but because it feels wrong. Like a glitch. A betrayal. As if reality itself has malfunctioned. That visceral discomfort. That ache that says, this shouldn't be happening. That's the fairness bias. And it runs deeper than logic. It begins early. Childhood. Stories teach it to you. The villain always falls. The hero always triumphs. Cinderella gets the prince. The wicked stepmother is defeated. These aren't just tales. They're emotional maps. Templates for how the world is supposed to work. And your brain, designed to find patterns and assign meaning, absorbs these narratives as truths. But then, life intervenes. You work hard and get overlooked. You love someone and they leave. You speak up and get punished. Someone cheats, lies, manipulates, and still gets ahead. You see injustice not as an unfortunate reality, but as a violation. Not just of your hopes, but of how you believe the universe should behave. This is the bias, the expectation that fairness isn't just preferred, but natural. That justice isn't just a value, but a law. And so, when the world deviates, the pain cuts deeper. It's not just sadness, it's confusion. Betrayal. A kind of existential vertigo. You try to make sense of the injustice, to fit it into your map, but you can't. So you blame yourself, others, systems, or you spiral into nihilism, wondering why effort matters if outcomes are random. But here's the hard truth. The world was never fair to begin with. Nature doesn't reward the kindest organism. It rewards the most adaptive, the most strategic, the most unrelenting. Evolution doesn't care about moral balance. It cares about survival. And society, while more structured, still reflects this chaos. Power concentrates. Accidents happen. People suffer for things they didn't cause and are praised for traits they didn't earn. And yet, you still expect fairness. Why? Because the fairness bias serves a purpose. It motivates cooperation. It fuels morality. It keeps societies from collapsing into cruelty. If no one believed in fairness, no one would resist injustice. So the belief persists, not because it's always true, but because it's useful. It gives people the strength to protest, to defend the weak, to imagine better systems. But when you personalize the bias, when you believe fairness is owed to you, pain deepens. You see misfortune not just as bad luck, but as cosmic punishment. You think, what did I do to deserve this? When sometimes, you did nothing. You try to find fault in yourself to justify the imbalance, as if unfairness must be earned. But injustice doesn't need a reason. It just is. And that's the trap. The brain would rather invent a cruel explanation than accept randomness. Because randomness is unbearable. At least if you caused it, you can fix it. But if you didn't, then you're powerless. And powerlessness, true, unfixable powerlessness, is the scariest realization of all. So the fairness bias steps in, not to hurt you, but to protect you. To keep you believing there's an order you can trust. But sometimes, that belief turns inward. And it punishes you for things you never controlled. So what do? You stop expecting the world to be fair. Not to become cynical, but to become clear. You separate morality from reality. You do good not because it guarantees reward, but because it defines you. You speak truth not because the system listens, but because silence would poison your own reflection. You love not because it always returns, but because withholding love turns you to stone. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "Now that it has, what do I choose to become?" The fairness bias won't disappear. It's wired into your emotion, your instinct, your sense of justice. But you can learn to see it when it arises. To feel its ache without obeying its story. To recognize that just because something feels wrong doesn't mean the universe will fix it. Because here's the paradox. Once you stop expecting fairness from the world, you become freer to create it. In your actions, your choices, your voice, you realize that fairness isn't a law of nature. It's a practice, a defiance, a light you carry, not because the world gave it to you, but because you refuse to let the dark take everything. And that refusal, that quiet decision to be just in an unjust world, that is your real power. The sunk cost trap. You've spent months on a project that's going nowhere. The numbers don't work. The feedback is bad. Your instincts say, walk away. But you don't. You double down. You stay late. You keep pushing. Not because it's working, but because you've already spent so much time on it. You can't bear the thought of all that effort being wasted. So you stay. This is the sunk cost trap. And it's one of the most powerful psychological illusions you'll ever face. We like to believe we're logical. That we base decisions on current facts, future rewards, rational outcomes. But we don't. We base decisions on emotion. And nothing fuels emotion more than loss. Especially loss that's already happened. The moment you invest time, money, energy, or love into something, it becomes harder to let go. Even if it's failing. Even if it's hurting you. Because now, walking away doesn't feel like a new decision. It feels like admitting defeat. Like all the effort meant nothing. But that's the illusion. A sunk cost is exactly what it sounds like. It's sunk. Gone. Irrecoverable. You can't get it back. But the trap is thinking that just because you've already paid, you have to keep paying. That finishing the race justifies the pain, even if the finish line leads nowhere. This plays out everywhere. You stay in a toxic relationship because you've been together for years. You keep watching a terrible movie because you already sat through an hour. You keep a failing business alive because you put your savings into it. You continue down a career path that drains you, simply because of the degree you earned. You refuse to leave the table because of all the chips you've already lost. But none of those reasons are rational. They're emotional defenses, desperate attempts to protect the past from feeling like a mistake. And the past doesn't care. In behavioral economics, this bias is well studied. People make worse decisions when reminded of past investments. One study gave participants 2 vacations to choose from. Objectively, one was better. But when reminded they'd already paid for the other, participants picked the worse one. Just to avoid wasting the money, even though the money was already gone. The sunk cost fallacy hijacks your mind. It whispers, don't waste what you've done. But continuing to invest in failure doesn't make the past count. It wastes the future too. It's painful to let go. Painful to say, I was wrong. But true strength isn't in finishing what doesn't serve you. It's in knowing when to stop. The trap gets tighter when ego is involved. The more public the investment, the harder it becomes to walk away. You've told people this is your dream. You've built your identity around it. You've promised. You've committed. So now, quitting feels like collapsing. Like unraveling. Like becoming a hypocrite. But here's the truth. Your past choices do not own you. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to leave things unfinished if finishing them leads nowhere. Staying just to validate the time you already lost loses more time. And time is the one thing you never get back. Think of your life as a car ride. You took a wrong turn. You drove an hour in the wrong direction. The sunk cost trap says, keep going. Maybe it'll work out. But logic says, turn around. Every mile forward is another mile you'll regret. Pride says, don't admit the mistake. But wisdom says, mistakes are tuition. Learn and move on. There's a reason casinos thrive. Gamblers lose $100, then bet another 100 to win it back. Not because the odds are better, but because their brain won't let them accept the loss. And so they guarantee a bigger one. You don't have to be in a casino for this to happen. Life has 1,000 tables, and every one of us sits at them. What have you kept chasing? Simply because you already started. Sometimes we call it perseverance, grit, loyalty. But not all persistence is strength. Sometimes it's fear in disguise. Fear of regret. Fear of admitting we can't fix it. Fear of the void that opens when we finally let go. But what if that void is freedom? Because the moment you walk away from a losing battle, something remarkable happens. You reclaim your future. You unchain your decisions from your past. You stop living for the memory of what should have worked, and start living for what might. The sunk cost trap is not just about bad decisions. It's about identity. Letting go means rewriting who you thought you were, and that takes courage. But clinging to something just to protect the past? That's not identity. That's imprisonment. So here's the question. Are you still there because it's right, or because it's already happened? And if it wasn't yours to begin with, if it's draining you, breaking you, leaving you stuck, then maybe the bravest thing you can do is leave the table. The soft certainty. You remember it clearly. The color of the sky. The smell in the air. The way someone looked at you just before everything changed. The memory feels vivid, sharp, undeniable. You'd bet your life on it. But what if you're wrong? What if the detail that makes it feel real is the very thing that makes it deceptive? This is the soft certainty, a subtle, psychological illusion where you trust memories more when they feel vivid, even though vividness has no reliable correlation with accuracy. Your mind doesn't just recall events. It judges them. And it judges them based on how they feel, not how true they are. And that's where the danger begins. When you recall a moment, say, an argument with a loved one, or a childhood memory, your brain doesn't pull up a perfect recording. It rebuilds the memory from scattered fragments. Visual, emotional, sensory data stored in different places. And each time you remember, the act of remembering itself alters the memory. You're editing your internal archive without even realizing it. But here's what happens next. If the memory feels detailed, if the visuals are bright, the emotion intense, the context anchored, your brain assigns it high confidence. Not because it confirmed it with logic, but because it feels real. And that's the soft certainty. You don't remember what happened. You remember how remembering feels. And when it feels strong, you trust it like gospel. But psychologists have tested this over and over again. In classic experiments, participants are shown a series of images or videos. Later, they're asked to recall details. Some memories are vivid, some are vague. But when tested against the actual footage, researchers find something unsettling. Vivid memories are no more likely to be accurate than vague ones. Sometimes they're even less accurate, because vivid false memories feel truer than real but blurry ones. It gets worse. In one study, people were shown doctored photos of events they never attended, like riding in a hot air balloon as a child. After a few sessions of guided recall, many began to remember the event clearly, even adding details that were never suggested. They weren't lying. They weren't confused. They were experiencing synthetic memory and trusting it because it felt vivid. The implication is terrifying. Your most powerful memories, those that define who you are, that shape your identity, your relationships, your regrets, might be false in the details. Not fabricated, but bent, colored, reinforced by emotion, not truth. And yet, when someone challenges your version of a shared event, you might react with disbelief, defensiveness, even anger. I was there. I remember. But remember, so do they. Differently. And just as vividly. So who's right? Maybe no one. This plays out in courtrooms. Eyewitness testimony is often the most persuasive evidence, especially when delivered with confidence and clarity. But cognitive scientists have shown that eyewitness memory is deeply unreliable. Stress, time, suggestion, all warp recall. But the vividness of the witness's memory leads jurors to believe them. They sound sure. They sound right. So they must be. Except they aren't. And lives are changed because of it. But let's make it more personal. Think about your own life. That time you felt betrayed. That conversation you revisit in your head, over and over. That first love, that fight, that triumph. How sure are you that you remember it accurately? You may remember how you felt. The flash of anger. The taste of fear. The warmth of joy. But emotion enhances memory confidence, not memory truth. Your brain uses feeling as a shortcut for accuracy. And that shortcut, while efficient, can create false clarity. This doesn't mean your past is a lie. It means your past is a story, filtered, emotional, vivid where it matters to you, and dim where it doesn't. And that's okay. We all do it. The soft certainty isn't a flaw. It's a coping mechanism. The brain favors clarity because clarity makes action possible. If every memory felt ambiguous, you'd never trust yourself. So your mind locks in on vivid ones, and calls them real. But now that you know, you have a choice. The next time you recall a powerful moment, and it feels too solid, too detailed, too absolute, pause. Ask yourself, do I remember this? Or do I remember the feeling of remembering it? Ask, have I replayed this so often that I've etched it deeper than it deserves? And ask, could someone else, standing beside me that day, remember it completely differently, just as vividly? That's not weakness. That's awareness. The soft certainty isn't about doubt. It's about humility. It's about realizing that even our most sacred memories are reconstructed films, not raw footage. And that the emotion in a memory doesn't guarantee the accuracy of its content. We are meaning-making machines. And vividness feels like meaning. But feeling is not fact. So tread carefully with the memories you cherish. And even more carefully with the ones you use as proof of love, of betrayal, of truth. Because what you're remembering so clearly might be real. Or it might be the soft certainty speaking. And it speaks in high definition. The control illusion. You tighten your grip on the steering wheel in a storm. You blow on dice before a roll. You double-check a sent message, thinking maybe this time it will land better. And somewhere deep inside, you feel, if I try hard enough, if I care enough, maybe I can make things turn out the way I want. But here's the haunting truth. Many of the things you think you control, you don't. This is the control illusion. It's the quiet, comforting lie your brain tells you, that you have influence over outcomes that are entirely beyond your reach. It's not delusion in the way we imagine insanity. It's something more subtle, more universal, more human. It's the belief that effort equals influence. That intention guarantees impact. That reality will bend, if only you try hard enough. And it begins early. Children as young as 2 exhibit this illusion. When given a button that isn't connected to anything, they'll still press it repeatedly, convinced their action is causing change. In adults, the illusion becomes more complex, but no less persistent. In one classic experiment, participants were asked to press buttons that had no effect on outcomes, yet still believed they were influencing what happened. The illusion remained, even when evidence suggested otherwise. Why? Because the alternative, not being in control, is terrifying. Your brain craves agency. It wants a story in which you are the author, not the audience. A life in which you can predict, decide, and shape. When something good happens, you feel responsible. When something bad happens, you search for what you could have done differently. Because randomness, true randomness, is intolerable to the mind. So the brain rewrites reality. It invents cause where there is none. It draws connections between effort and outcome, even when the outcome was luck, or chaos, or someone else's choice. You think, I nailed that interview, when in truth, the decision was made before you walked in. You think, if I say it perfectly, they'll understand, when their mind was already closed. You think, if I stay positive, it'll all work out, when the storm is already overhead. And this illusion is adaptive, until it's not. It gives hope. It motivates action. People who believe they have control tend to persist longer, try harder, and recover faster. Even in medical settings, patients who feel they have some say in their treatment, whether or not they actually do, show better outcomes. The illusion soothes. It energizes. It protects. But at a cost. Because when control is just an illusion, it means you're expending energy trying to steer a ship with no rudder. It means you'll blame yourself for outcomes you never had the power to prevent. It means you'll keep revisiting moments, replaying them, rehearsing different versions, trying to find the move that could have changed everything. You become trapped in loops of if only, and what if, not realizing the game was never yours to win. And there's a deeper wound here. The illusion of control makes you responsible not only for your fate, but for others. You think, I could have saved them. I should have seen it coming. If I'd just done more. But some losses weren't preventable. Some pain wasn't avoidable. Some people were already too far away, no matter how tightly you reached. Yet still, you hold on. Because control feels safer than powerlessness. Even false control. This is how anxiety often takes root. Not from chaos, but from the desperate attempt to organize chaos. You try to control thoughts, sensations, futures. You try to micromanage time, people, even your own emotions, thinking if you just optimize everything, nothing will go wrong. But life does go wrong. And the illusion shatters. And you're left wondering, why couldn't I fix it? Because you were never meant to. The truth is, control in life is partial, fragile, and often delayed. You can plant the seed, but you can't control the rain. You can speak with honesty, but you can't control how you're heard. You can prepare for the worst, but you can't stop it from arriving. And the more you cling to control, the more you narrow your view. You begin to fear spontaneity. Avoid uncertainty. Mistake flexibility for weakness. You tighten, obsess, rehearse. You forget how to live, because you're too busy trying to manage. But what if there's a different kind of power? Not in control, but in clarity. The power to see what is yours and what isn't. To know where your influence ends. To love fully without believing you can rescue. To grieve deeply without believing you could have stopped the loss. To act with integrity, knowing the outcome is not your reward, but your offering. This clarity doesn't soothe like control does. It doesn't flatter your ego or promise security. But it frees you. It softens the grip. It teaches you to show up anyway, to pour yourself into what matters, even when the ending isn't yours to write. Because sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is let go. To speak, even if you won't be understood. To try, even if you might fail. To love, even if they leave. To step forward, knowing the ground may shift beneath you. And in that surrender, you find something better than control. You find presence. You find resilience. You find peace, not because you can shape everything, but because you no longer need to. The illusion fades. But something real remains. You. Right here. Fully alive. In a world that was never yours to control, but still, somehow, yours to meet. The emotion override. You feel it in your chest. That tightness. That pull. That sharp pulse behind your ribs that says, this is real. This matters. This is the truth. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's love so overwhelming it short-circuits logic. Whatever it is, it feels undeniable. So you act on it. You make the call. Send the message. Slam the door. Break the rule. Speak the words you can't take back. Because how could a feeling this strong be wrong? This is the emotion override. And it's one of the most seductive lies your mind ever tells you. You assume that when emotions are intense, when they burn so brightly you can't think straight, they must be revealing some deeper truth. That anger means you've been wronged. That guilt means you're guilty. That anxiety means danger is near. That love means forever. But feelings aren't facts. They're reactions. Interpretations. Sometimes accurate, often not. Emotions evolved to help us survive. To move us toward safety, connection, nourishment. But they were designed for a different world, a world of immediate threats, primal decisions, and instinctive action. Your ancestors didn't need nuance. They needed speed. So the emotional brain was built to override everything else. To silence thought in favor of motion. To act first. Reflect later. And in that world, it worked. But in this world, it can destroy you. Because now, the threats aren't tigers or cliffs. They're texts. Tone of voice. Delayed responses. A look across the room. And yet your emotional system still reacts with the same urgency. The same physiological sirens. You get rejected, and your body responds like it's being exiled from the tribe. You see a critical comment, and your brain treats it like a mortal attack. You feel a wave of jealousy, and your mind starts spinning stories that never happened. The emotion is real, but its meaning is not. And here's the core of the override. When a feeling is strong, you stop questioning it. You stop asking, is this justified? Is this helpful? Is this rooted in reality or in memory? You just believe. Because emotions come before thoughts. They arrive fast. They hijack your systems. They change how you interpret everything. If you feel sad, even good news sounds hollow. If you feel rage, even kindness feels manipulative. If you feel unworthy, even love feels suspicious. Emotion paints the world. And once the color is laid down, reason has to argue from behind the glass. Even knowing this doesn't always help. Because when you're in it, really in it, it feels like truth. That's the override. It doesn't whisper. It screams. And your logic tries to argue, but the emotional system controls the microphone. You know they didn't mean to hurt you. But you still feel wounded. You know this choice is probably a mistake. But you still feel drawn toward it. You know you're spiraling. But it still feels like the world is ending. That's the trap. Not that emotions exist, but that we treat them as final, as unchallengeable, as sacred. We say things like, go with your gut, trust your heart, feel your truth. But what if your gut is reacting to trauma? What if your heart is echoing old pain? What if your truth is warped by what someone else told you you deserved? Feelings are valid, but that doesn't make them correct. Validation is about acknowledgement, not accuracy. Just because a feeling deserves attention, doesn't mean it deserves control. Here's what's worse. The stronger the emotion, the harder it is to think clearly. Anger narrows focus. Fear amplifies risks. Shame kills self-reflection. And love, real, powerful love, can blind you to warning signs, to red flags, to yourself. Because intense emotion feels like certainty. And certainty feels like truth. But it's not. It's just loud. The emotion override thrives on volume. It drowns out the quiet voice inside you that says, pause. It buries the questions that could save you. It silences the part of you that knows better, but can't shout through the storm. So what can you do? You learn to pause. Not to suppress emotion, but to observe it. To say, this is what I feel. But is it the full story? You learn to separate the feeling from the conclusion. You learn to sit with it. And in the stillness, you start to hear the parts of you that the override tried to erase. The parts that remember nuance. That carry context. That whisper, you felt this before. And it wasn't always right. Because emotion is not the enemy. It's a message. But messages must be interpreted, not obeyed. The storm may be real, but you are not the storm. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to feel everything, and still choose differently. That's the end of the override. Not silence, but sovereignty. The moment when emotion rises, and you don't run, don't react, don't collapse. You listen, and then you decide. Because feelings are waves. And you are the shore. The nostalgia filter. You look back and sigh. Not in pain, but in longing. You remember the way things were, the laughter, the songs, the faces in the glow of simpler times. It felt easier then. Lighter. Safer. The world made more sense. You felt more alive. And part of you wishes, deeply and helplessly, that you could go back. Even just for a moment. But what if the feeling you're remembering isn't real. This is the nostalgia filter, your mind's quiet habit of editing the past, smoothing out the rough edges, softening the noise, and turning chaos into calm. You remember how things felt, not how they were. And you remember the feeling selectively, warm, safe, slow, not the exhaustion, the confusion, the doubt you carried alongside it. Your brain doesn't store memories like a video camera. It stores fragments, highlight reels, emotional peaks, mental snapshots. And over time, it rewrites them. Not maliciously. Not to lie. But to make sense of who you are. You remember the smell of summer air, but not the argument that happened that night. You remember the thrill of being young, but not the anxiety of not knowing who you'd become. The joy remains. The struggle fades. And this creates a powerful illusion that the past was better. You look at old photos and feel a pang of sadness. You watch an old movie and feel comforted. You hear a song and remember who you once were. But the person you were back then, they didn't feel the magic the way you do now. They were struggling, lost in their own present, hoping for something more, maybe even longing for a past they had filtered. That's the trap of nostalgia. It convinces you that the past had clarity the present lacks, that you've fallen from something pure. But in truth, it's the same chaos, then and now, just filtered through time. Psychologically, nostalgia has a function. It soothes. It connects. When the present feels uncertain, your mind searches backward for a sense of identity. It recalls moments when you felt loved, safe, seen. And it brings them forward, not as fact, but as emotional balm. It calms the nervous system. It makes you feel whole. But it also makes you ache for a version of life that may never have existed the way you remember it. Studies show that when people are asked to recall their past, they consistently underestimate how hard things were. They overestimate how happy they were. This isn't failure of memory. It's adaptation. Your brain wants to see a golden past. It gives you roots when the present feels adrift. But it also gives you a false comparison, one that poisons today. Because the more perfect the past becomes, the more flawed the present feels. You start to think, things were better then. Not just in memory, but in value. In meaning. You romanticize old relationships. You idealize old versions of yourself. You forget that the same problems you face now, uncertainty, insecurity, fear, you felt them then too. They just wore different clothes. And yet nostalgia persists. Especially in hard times. Political unrest. People long for the good old days. Personal failure. You remember when you were at your best. But memory is a mirror that lies kindly. It shows you what you need to see, not what was actually there. Even collectively, societies glamorize the past. We talk about eras of greatness, of purity, of simplicity. But every generation has done this. Even people 100 years ago were nostalgic for a past they believed was better. It's not about time, it's about emotion. About longing. About the human need to anchor ourselves to something we believe we've lost. But nothing was as simple as it seems in retrospect. Life was never perfect. The world was never clean. The past only feels better because it's finished. It has shape. It has boundaries. You survived it. And survival brings comfort, even if the moment itself was chaotic. So what do you do when the nostalgia filter starts to cloud your vision? You don't reject it. You respect it. You say, thank you for showing me what mattered. But then you ask, what am I overlooking now? Because one day, this moment, flawed and confusing as it is, will become the past you miss. The people you're texting. The city you live in. The thoughts you're wrestling with. This ordinary moment will one day glow in memory. And when it does, you'll forget the fatigue. The scrolling. The boredom. You'll remember the warmth of that one smile. The night you laughed without knowing why. The song that played while you cleaned the kitchen. You'll remember the color of the light on your wall. And you'll wonder why you didn't appreciate it more. That's the truth under nostalgia. It's not a lie. It's a lesson. A reminder to pay attention now, to the moments that feel too small to matter. Because they will matter. They always do. The future version of you will be nostalgic for today. Not for its perfection, but for its presence. So take a breath. Look around. You're in the middle of what your heart will one day ache for. Not because things were better, but because you were there. The predictive ego. You think you know how you'll feel when the exam results come in, when the job offer lands, when the relationship ends. You imagine the joy, the grief, the pride, the collapse. You picture it all, down to the details. But here's the truth you won't want to hear. You're probably wrong. This is the predictive ego, the illusion that you can forecast your future emotions with accuracy, that you can simulate how something will make you feel, and base your decisions on that imagined outcome. But study after study says otherwise. The mind is a terrible weather app for its own emotions. It overestimates, underestimates, dramatizes, and distorts. And yet, it believes itself every time. It's called effective forecasting, our ability to predict our emotional reactions to future events. And we're notoriously bad at it. You think failing that test will destroy you. It won't. You think getting that promotion will make you happy forever. It won't. You imagine rejection will crush you beyond repair. It won't. Because what your predictive ego forgets is that the future you isn't the current you. You'll adapt. You'll grow. You'll forget. Or you'll find something new to obsess over. But in your head, you live out the story as if it's the end of the world. And the predictive ego is dramatic. It paints heartbreak as unbearable, success as eternal bliss, and change as catastrophic. But real life is quieter, softer, more complicated. Why do we fall for this illusion? Because emotion feels absolute in the moment. When you're happy, you think it will last. When you're anxious, you assume the fear will always be there. And so when we imagine the future, we use now as a lens. If you're lonely, the future feels empty. If you're hopeful, it feels bright. But that lens is warped. The brain projects forward from its current state, then forgets that emotional states change. So your forecast is contaminated. Not by the truth, but by your mood. Take breakups. People think they'll never move on. They predict months of misery, social isolation, permanent scars. But 6 weeks later, many report feeling relief, clarity, even empowerment. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain didn't behave the way they imagined. It arrived differently, faded faster, taught them more. Or consider big wins. A lottery ticket, a dream home, a viral success. We imagine the high will last forever. But within months, the emotional baseline resets. The brain adapts. It says, "What's next?" The predicted euphoria becomes Tuesday afternoon. This phenomenon is called the impact bias. We overestimate both the intensity and the duration of future emotions. We think bad will feel worse, and good will feel better, for longer than they ever do. And then there's focalism, our habit of focusing so intensely on one future event that we forget everything else that will happen alongside it. You imagine getting fired and forget the friends who'll support you. You picture getting married and forget the mundane struggles that still exist. You visualize rejection and forget that you've survived worse. The predictive ego is so confident, so convincing. It tells you, "Trust me. I know exactly how this will feel." But it's guessing. It's narrating. It's protecting itself. Or sometimes, sabotaging itself. And here's the dangerous part. We build our lives around these flawed predictions. We avoid risks because we assume the pain will be too much. We chase things not because they'll make us happy, but because we believe they must. We stay in situations that drain us because we fear the imagined regret of leaving, even if staying is already hurting more. The predictive ego traps us in false futures, ones that never arrive, or arrive looking nothing like the simulation. And it's not because we're foolish. It's because we care. The predictive ego wants to help. It wants to protect you. It's trying to anticipate danger, maximize joy, minimize regret. But in doing so, it forgets the most important variable of all. You change. You're not just the person imagining the future. You're also the person who will live it. And that person will feel different. Will react differently. Will discover strength, laughter, numbness, perspective, things you can't forecast from where you stand now. So the next time your mind says, "Don't do this, it'll ruin you," or "Do this, it'll complete you," pause. Ask yourself not just how it will feel, but how long it will feel that way, and who you'll be after the feeling fades. Because that's what the predictive ego never tells you. Emotions aren't destinations. They're weather. And weather changes. You can't plan your life around a storm that hasn't formed yet. And you can't build eternity on a sunrise that hasn't come. So make your choices not from predicted emotion, but from alignment, from truth, from values, from the person you want to become, not the feelings you're afraid to feel. Because your future will hurt. And your future will shine. But neither will feel the way you think it will. And that's okay. Because you're not meant to forecast life. You're meant to live it. The luck attribution. You worked hard. You pushed through uncertainty. You delivered. People congratulate you, admire you. But instead of feeling pride, something inside you shrinks. You smile, deflect, and say, "I just got lucky." You mean it. And later, when things go wrong, when you fail, when you're rejected, there's no buffer, no excuse. You blame yourself entirely. This is the luck attribution, a quiet distortion in how you assign credit and blame. A pattern where your mind minimizes success and maximizes failure. Where external forces get the glory for what you've earned, and you alone bear the weight of what goes wrong. And it doesn't come from weakness. It comes from survival. From years of learning that pride feels dangerous. That owning your wins invites scrutiny, expectation, or disappointment. So instead, you outsource your victories to luck, to fate, to timing, to anything but yourself. Because if you didn't cause the success, you don't have to live up to it again. But here's the trap. This protective instinct becomes a prison. The more you attribute success to luck, the more you disconnect from your own power. The more you blame yourself for failure, the more success feels like fraud. You create an internal logic that is bulletproof and deeply unfair. You start to believe that achievement only counts if it's perfect. That effort doesn't matter if the outcome isn't flawless. That real talent should feel effortless. So when things go well, it must have been luck. And when they don't, you think, "See, I knew I wasn't enough." But what's really happening is deeper than insecurity. It's a narrative collapse. You've wired your brain to protect yourself from disappointment by disowning credit. You think humility is a virtue, and it is, but this isn't humility. This is self-erasure. And it's not uncommon. Many high achievers fall into this pattern. Especially those with perfectionistic tendencies. Especially those who grew up praised for outcomes instead of effort. Or those whose early successes were treated like flukes. The world told them they were gifted, so every stumble felt like betrayal. To cope, they decided, if I win, I'll pretend it wasn't me. That way, I can't be exposed. Over time, this becomes automatic. You hit a milestone, but feel numb. You do something brave, but downplay it. You hear praise, and it bounces off you. But criticism? That sinks in instantly. It confirms the narrative you've already built. And so, the luck attribution loop deepens. What makes this pattern so damaging is that it blocks integration. Your identity splits. There's the part of you that acts, that achieves, that shows up. And there's the part of you that watches from a distance, refusing to believe it's real. You become a ghost inside your own accomplishments. And worst of all, you think this makes you noble. Like it's wrong to own your light. Like self-recognition is arrogance. But it's not. It's honesty. Because here's the truth. Luck is real. Timing matters. Privilege exists. Randomness plays a role. But you showed up for it. You made choices. You prepared. You endured. Luck might have opened the door. But you still had to walk through it. And failure, that too, is complex. It's not pure self-sabotage. It's not proof of inadequacy. It's data. It's friction. It's resistance that refines. But when you treat failure as moral proof of your worthlessness, you lose the chance to grow. You bury insight under shame. This asymmetry, where success is luck and failure is self, becomes your operating system. And over time, it burns you out. Because nothing feels earned. Everything feels borrowed. You run faster. Do more. Achieve harder, just to silence the feeling that none of it is really yours. So how do you break it? First, notice it. The next time someone praises you, watch what your mind does. Does it deflect? Shrug it off. Redirect attention to others or circumstances. That's your filter firing. That's the pattern trying to stay intact. Then ask, what would it feel like to say, thank you, and stop there? Not thank you, but, not, I was lucky. Just, thank you. That moment of discomfort is your real self stepping forward. Next, revisit your successes. Not the outcomes. The process. What did you navigate? What skills did you build? What courage did it take to even try? Write it down. Say it out loud. You don't have to broadcast it to the world, but you do have to let yourself see it. And finally, challenge your failure narrative. When something goes wrong, don't ask, what did I do wrong? First, ask, what did I learn? What did I risk? What did I try that others didn't? Frame failure as part of motion, not proof of identity. Because you are not a fluke. You are not a lucky accident wrapped in fear. You are a builder, a survivor, a thinker, a creator. And luck, when it shows up, is just the wind in the sails you already crafted. The world will offer you doubt. It will hand you narratives of randomness, of fragility, of imposterhood. But you get to choose your story. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to write one where you actually believe you belong. Because you do. And luck was never the whole reason. The familiar comfort. You hear something that fits your worldview, something you've heard before, something that sounds right, and your body relaxes. There's a warmth to it, a quiet nod deep in your chest. You think, yes, that makes sense. But did you verify it? Did you examine it? Or did it simply feel good to believe? This is the familiar comfort. It's the subtle, seductive mistake of equating what feels safe with what is true. It's not a failure of intelligence. It's a byproduct of being human. Your brain is wired not just to seek truth, but to seek coherence. Familiarity offers that. It calms the nervous system. It reduces uncertainty. It says, this is known. You've survived this before. Stay here. And so, you do. Even if the belief is outdated. Even if the idea is flawed. Even if what's comfortable is slowly closing the walls around your thinking. The familiar comfort doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in the articles you click, the people you trust, the thoughts you don't challenge. It's why conspiracy theories gain traction, not because they're logical, but because they echo feelings and narratives people already know. It's why someone can hold a belief their entire life without once asking if it's true, because to do so would be to step into the unknown. And the unknown is painful. Familiarity activates the brain's default mode network, the circuitry linked to self-reference, memory, and daydreaming. It's neurologically cozy, safe. But this comfort comes at a price. It biases perception. You begin to notice information that confirms what you already believe, and filter out what threatens it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but beneath it is something even deeper, emotional loyalty to the familiar. You've lived with certain stories your whole life. About who you are. What's good. What's dangerous. What success means. What love looks like. These stories are not just ideas. They're homes. Leaving them feels like exile. Questioning them feels like betrayal. So instead, you nestle deeper into them, until they become indistinguishable from truth. But comfort is not truth. It's repetition. It's emotional inertia. And the longer you let comfort guide you, the harder it becomes to recognize when it's lying. Because comfort doesn't require evidence. It just requires resonance. It's why a soft, familiar lie often feels more believable than a hard, unfamiliar truth. It's why people stay in relationships, jobs, or ideologies that hurt them, because leaving would mean entering the wild terrain of something new. Something uncertain. And even pain, if known, can feel safer than the unknown. But here's the danger. Comfort numbs curiosity. It teaches you to settle instead of search, to defend instead of investigate. You stop asking what else might be true, and start asking how can I protect what I already believe. And your growth slows. Because transformation lives in discomfort. Truth often arrives dressed as doubt. And the beliefs that shape your future may feel unfamiliar at first, because they don't yet have a neural path carved through years of repetition. So how do you break free from the familiar comfort? You begin by noticing when something feels too easy to believe. When a thought slips in smoothly and asks no questions of you. Pause. Ask, do I believe this because it's true, or because it's familiar? You learn to tolerate discomfort. To hold uncertainty without panic. To say I don't know without shame. You seek out unfamiliar ideas, not to adopt them blindly, but to test your own. You read things you disagree with. You listen to people who challenge you. You step outside the algorithmic bubble that keeps feeding you your own echo. And most importantly, you reframe what comfort means. True comfort isn't the absence of challenge. It's the presence of integrity. It's knowing that what you believe has been earned, not inherited. That you've interrogated your foundations. That you didn't choose your truth because it felt safe, but because it stood up to the fire of your questions. So next time you find yourself drawn to a belief like a warm blanket, ask yourself, am I wrapping myself in this because it's true? Or because it reminds me of home? The familiar comfort is not evil. It's human. But if you live there too long, you forget that growth begins at the edge of what you've never seen before. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is step into the cold. The justification reflex. You make a choice. It feels small at first. A comment. A glance. A decision made in passing. You move on. But then someone questions it. A friend asks, why did you say that? A voice in your head whispers, was that really the right thing? And instantly, before reflection, before self-doubt, before truth, you begin to justify. You explain. You defend. You create a story that makes your choice seem reasonable, even noble. You don't pause to wonder if you were wrong. You reinforce that you were right. This is the justification reflex. And it might be the most invisible trap your brain sets. The reflex is automatic. You choose, and then you protect that choice. Even if it hurt someone. Even if it sabotaged your progress. Even if it betrayed your own values. Because the deeper priority isn't truth, it's self-preservation. Your brain is hardwired to defend its narrative of you as competent, moral, consistent. So when reality threatens that image, the reflex activates. And instead of confronting discomfort, you build a wall of explanation. A quick example. You cut someone off in traffic. Your brain doesn't say, that was selfish. It says, they were going too slow. Or, I'm in a rush. Or, they should have seen me coming. Not because those things are true, but because they protect the story you want to believe about yourself. That you're a good person. That your actions make sense. That you're still in control. But underneath, something's shaking. Because every time you justify without reflection, you widen the gap between who you are and who you say you are. That gap becomes heavy. It shows up as defensiveness, as rationalization, as a refusal to back down, even when you know, quietly, you were wrong. Because to admit that would mean tearing a hole in your own narrative. And we're not wired for that kind of self-fracture. The reflex is rooted in something ancient. To survive socially, your ancestors needed consistency. If you said one thing and did another, you became unpredictable, untrustworthy, vulnerable. So your brain evolved a quick patch. When action and self-image conflict, don't change the image, change the interpretation. You didn't lie, you protected someone's feelings. You didn't procrastinate, you were strategizing. You didn't lash out, you were defending yourself. It's not a conscious decision. It's a built-in response. Fast, efficient, emotionally anesthetic, and dangerously self-deceptive. This is why we double down. Even in the face of facts. Even when presented with proof we were mistaken, the reflex says, no. Here's why I did it. Here's why I had to. Here's why it wasn't really wrong. Because the cost of admitting fault feels too high. But here's the paradox. The more you justify, the more fragile you become. Because now, you must protect not just your actions, but the whole illusion built around them. You must rewrite memory, redefine principles, shift standards, and eventually betray truth. Not to others, but to yourself. That's the hidden cost of the justification reflex. It starts as protection. It ends as erosion. It eats away at your ability to grow, to adapt, to connect. Because relationships don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be honest. And self-development doesn't need you to always be right. It needs you to be willing to recognize when you're wrong. But the reflex resists. It's subtle. You'll feel it as that tightening in your chest when someone challenges you. That surge of reasons, some true, some invented, that rush in before you've even heard the other side. That need to defend you, rather than examine what's real. It's not weakness. It's conditioning. But it's also escapable. And the escape begins with pause. With catching the reflex in motion. With noticing when you're crafting a story, instead of owning the truth. When you say, I did this because, ask yourself, is that the real reason? Or the reason that sounds better? You won't always know. But asking is a crack in the reflex. And enough cracks become change. Because something powerful happens when you admit you were wrong. You don't break. You expand. You reclaim your agency. You stop outsourcing your integrity to convenience. You stop burying discomfort beneath excuses. You begin to trust yourself, not because you're always right, but because you're willing to look when you're not. That's where growth begins. Not in perfection, but in the quiet courage of, I messed up. I got that wrong. I acted out of fear. Those words hurt, but they heal more than any justification ever could. Because they're real. And they don't trap you in the past. They unlock your future. That's the justification reflex. It whispers that being wrong is a threat. But the truth, admitting you're wrong, is the beginning of being right again. The social proof trap. You walk into a room and everyone is facing the same direction, staring at an empty wall. Without thinking, you turn and face it too. You're not sure why. You just follow. Because surely, they must know something you don't. Surely, if so many people are doing it, it can't be wrong. This is the social proof trap, the hidden instinct to outsource your judgment to the crowd. To assume popularity means truth. That if enough people agree, it must be real. And it shapes more of your life than you realize. It begins subtly. You scroll through reviews and click the one with 5 stars and thousands of votes. You laugh more at a joke when others laugh first. You feel safer when others seem calm. And you feel panic rising when others run. This is not weakness. It's wiring. Evolution sculpted your brain to look sideways before it looks forward. Because long ago, in the wild, the crowd was survival. If they ran, you ran. If they ate it, you could eat it. If they trusted someone, you did too. Those who ignored the group often didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. But what was once a survival instinct has become a cognitive trap. Today, the crowd is not your tribe. It's the internet. It's social media. It's filtered trends and artificial consensus. A few loud voices can appear like millions. And when you see likes, views, shares, you don't pause to verify. You assume truth. You assume value. That's the trap. The more people who believe something, the more credible it feels, regardless of whether it's right. You start to defer, not just opinions but morality, beliefs, identity. You don't ask, do I believe this? You ask, do others? And slowly, your inner compass becomes silent. Not because you lack it, but because the noise of the crowd is so loud, you stop listening for anything else. This trap shows up everywhere. In politics, you believe the winning side must be the correct one. In trends, you think the popular thing must be good. In spirituality, in science, even in relationships, you look to numbers for validation. If so many people love them, they must be worth loving. If no one's questioning it, maybe I shouldn't either. But the truth is, groups are often wrong. Spectacularly wrong. History is full of mobs that cheered injustice. Of masses that followed frauds. Of entire cultures that swallowed lies simply because they were repeated often and loudly enough. Social proof doesn't equal truth. It equals visibility. And yet, it feels so real. When you're the only one holding a different view, it doesn't just feel risky, it feels impossible. Your nervous system is wired for belonging. Rejection, even imagined, registers as pain. So your brain whispers, just agree. Just blend in. Don't question what everyone else seems so sure about. And that voice doesn't come once. It comes constantly. When you see a long line outside a restaurant, you assume it's good, even if you've never tasted the food. When you read a post with thousands of likes, you assume it's wise, even if it makes no sense. When you're told, everyone thinks this, you feel the need to go along, even if your gut says otherwise. This is how manipulation works. Not by forcing you, but by surrounding you. Making you feel like the outsider before you've even spoken. This is how lies become norms. Not because they're persuasive, but because they're repeated and reinforced by the sheer weight of consensus. But the deeper danger isn't believing a single falsehood. It's training yourself not to trust your own perception. Because the more you surrender your inner voice to the volume of the crowd, the quieter your judgment becomes. You start to feel doubt not just about the world, but about your ability to know the world. And that self-doubt, that's what silences integrity. So how do you escape? You start by noticing when the urge to conform shows up. When you feel the need to agree, pause. Ask yourself, do I believe this because I believe it? Or because others do? You won't always know. That's okay. The point isn't to be contrarian. The point is to reclaim awareness. You remember that popularity is not proof. That volume is not value. That being alone in a belief doesn't mean you're wrong. Some truths begin in silence. Some wisdom sounds strange at first. Some courage looks like doubt before it hardens into clarity. And when you speak your truth, without echo, without applause, you reclaim something most people spend their lives trying to find. Yourself. Because real clarity doesn't come from consensus. It comes from the quiet moments when you ask your mind what it actually sees, and listen to the answer, even if no one else agrees. The social proof trap wants you to follow, to blend, to obey the numbers and mistake them for meaning. But you were never meant to be an echo. You were meant to be a voice. The confirmation echo. You believe you're thinking freely, that your opinions are yours, that your views are the product of reason, logic, and truth. But slowly, almost invisibly, something begins to shape your thoughts. You surround yourself with voices that agree. You tune out the ones that challenge. And over time, disagreement feels not just wrong, but threatening. This is the confirmation echo, the hidden force that turns belief into certainty, and certainty into blindness. It starts innocently. You find a person who thinks like you. A podcast, a post, a video. It feels good, almost euphoric, to be validated. To hear your thoughts echoed back by someone articulate, passionate, confident. You feel understood, seen, empowered. So you follow more people like them. Join communities that resonate. Share ideas that reinforce what you already believe. And then, quietly, without permission, your feed begins to filter. The algorithm learns. It shows you more of the same, less of the rest. And soon, you're in a hall of mirrors, each reflection louder than the last, each opinion more certain, each disagreement framed as ignorance or evil. You're not searching for truth anymore. You're collecting agreement. And the more agreement you gather, the more convinced you become that everyone else must think like you. Because look around, everyone does. But they don't. You've just silenced the others. The confirmation echo isn't just a social phenomenon. It's neurological. Your brain is wired to seek confirmation, not contradiction. It feels rewarded when your beliefs are affirmed. Dopamine fires. The circuitry lights up. You feel safe, smart, right? But when you encounter opposing views, that same brain reacts as if it's under threat. Fight or flight. You feel anger, disgust, dismissiveness. Not because the argument is invalid, but because it challenges the self. You identify with your beliefs. So when they're questioned, you feel attacked. And this is where the echo grows dangerous. Because it starts to replace reality. You read a headline and assume the worst, because it fits your narrative. You see statistics that don't align with your worldview and immediately question the source. You witness someone change their mind, and instead of respecting it, you accuse them of betrayal. You're not analyzing. You're defending. This is how conspiracy theories thrive. How political polarization explodes. How misinformation spreads. Not because people are stupid, but because they're surrounded by voices saying the same thing over and over until it feels like truth. And truth is not immune to repetition. The more you hear something, even if it's false, the more likely you are to believe it. It's called the illusory truth effect. Repetition breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds trust. That's the echo. And here's the trap. The confirmation echo makes you feel smarter, while actually making you more closed. You mistake consensus for correctness. You start measuring truth not by evidence, but by volume. Everyone I follow says this, becomes, this must be true. But you've built the crowd. You chose the voices. You wrote the script. And now you're quoting it back to yourself. It doesn't just happen online. It happens in families, friend groups, religions, movements, workplaces. We form tribes, not just out of common goals, but out of common beliefs. And the more emotionally charged the belief, the harder it becomes to let dissent in. And yet, all growth begins with contradiction, with friction, with discomfort. The best ideas you'll ever have will begin as disagreements. The greatest clarity comes from hearing something that makes you pause, not cheer. But that only happens when you allow yourself to hear. So ask yourself, when was the last time you changed your mind? Not because someone convinced you with force, but because something broke through the echo. When was the last time you read something you disagreed with, and stayed curious, not defensive? If you can't remember, the echo might already be too loud. And it doesn't matter which side you're on. The confirmation echo has no ideology. It only has repetition. It will protect your comfort at the cost of your clarity. It will feed your certainty while starving your wisdom. It will give you a world that feels true, but isn't. Because truth is not what feels good. Truth is what remains after everything you wanted to believe falls apart. And truth rarely shouts. So turn down the volume. Step outside the echo. Seek voices that challenge you, not to shame, but to sharpen. Follow people who think differently, not because they're right, but because they might show you what you're not seeing. The echo feels safe. But real safety comes from resilience, not insulation. Because the most dangerous belief is not a wrong one. It's one you've never questioned. The label trap. You say you're an introvert. Or an overthinker. A perfectionist. A failure. A born leader. A hot mess. Maybe you label yourself anxious, gifted, broken, lazy, or creative. Whatever the word is, you wear it like skin, tight, intimate, unexamined. But what if that label isn't describing you? What if it's defining you? This is the label trap. A subtle, invisible force that makes you believe words are mirrors, when really, they're cages. It happens when descriptors harden into identities. When habits become destinies. When you forget that a label is not who you are, it's just where your behavior was, at a specific moment in time. And yet, we crave labels. Why? Because they make the chaos of selfhood feel manageable. They give shape to our stories. They explain our fears, our habits, our histories. They make us feel known, even if what's being known is incomplete. Or distorted. A label is a shortcut. But shortcuts come with a cost. Once you label yourself, you start editing your behavior to fit the box. You act introverted because you said you were. You avoid risks because you're not that type of person. You settle into anxiety, not because it feels good, but because it's now part of your narrative. And you stop asking the most important question, who could I become if I let the label go? This doesn't just happen to you. You do it to others too. You meet someone difficult and label them toxic. You see someone confident and call them arrogant. You decide someone is shy, or lazy, or fake, or cold, and that label becomes a lens. From that point forward, everything they do confirms what you already believe. Their complexity fades. And so does your curiosity. The label trap simplifies reality. But it also reduces it. It flattens people. It freezes growth. It takes what is fluid and makes it feel final. And worst of all, we don't notice it happening. Because labeling doesn't feel like a trap, it feels like understanding. It feels like clarity. But what it really does is remove nuance. It strips away the ability to evolve. Think about the labels you gave yourself as a child. Were they true? Or were they reactions to something external? How others treated you, what you feared, what you failed at once? And now, decades later, are you still dragging that identity forward, long after it stopped serving you? A kid who got nervous during speeches calls himself bad at public speaking for life. A teenager told they're dramatic decides they're too much forever. A college student who failed once says, "I'm just not academic." But these weren't deep truths. They were snapshots, frozen in emotion and repeated in thought until they solidified into identity. And once a label becomes your identity, you begin to defend it, even if it's painful. You say things like, "That's just who I am," or "I can't help it," or "I've always been this way." But always is a lie. You are not a frozen being. You are a nervous system in motion. A story that keeps rewriting itself, moment by moment. Labels are not inherently evil. They can offer insight, structure, shared language. Knowing you tend toward anxiety or impulsivity or creativity can be helpful, as long as you see it as a tendency, not a fate. But when the label stops being a map and becomes a border, you've lost freedom. And freedom is where growth lives. To escape the label trap, you must practice undefining yourself. Instead of saying, "I'm an anxious person," say, "I'm feeling anxiety right now." Instead of, "I'm a failure," say, "That attempt didn't work." Instead of, "I'm not a people person," say, "Social situations often drain me, but that might change." Small shifts in language loosen the cage. They invite movement. They create space between who you are and what you're experiencing. And in that space, something incredible happens. You stop performing your label. You start exploring yourself again. This is not about denial. It's about refusing to let one word write your whole story. You can honor your struggles without becoming them. You can acknowledge your tendencies without chaining yourself to them. You can be complex, contradictory, evolving. So next time you hear yourself say, "I'm just," pause. That's the trap opening. Ask instead, "Who am I when I'm not repeating this story?" Because the real you isn't fixed. The real you is in flux, alive, rewritable. The world doesn't need you to be a label. It needs you to be a person. Unpredictable, expanding, unfinished. Exactly as a human should be. The outcome bias. You look back at a decision. Maybe your own, maybe someone else's. It led to failure, pain, embarrassment. And instantly you think that was a bad choice. It feels obvious now, like it should have been avoided, like anyone thinking clearly would have known better. But what you're doing in that moment is not clarity. It's the outcome bias. The silent tendency to judge the quality of a decision only by how things turned out, while ignoring the uncertainty, complexity, and risk that surrounded it at the time. It's a mental trap that makes hindsight feel like foresight, and turns mistakes into character flaws instead of learning opportunities. Let's get something straight. Not all bad outcomes come from bad decisions. And not all good outcomes come from good ones. You can make a brilliant, thoughtful, well-informed choice, and still fail. You can also make a reckless, impulsive, selfish decision, and get lucky. But after the fact, the outcome overwhelms the process. Your brain rewrites the past to make it fit the result. It's a psychological coping mechanism. But it's also a distortion of truth. Think of a surgeon who chooses the safest, most evidence-based procedure, and the patient dies unexpectedly. The family says, "That was the wrong choice." Think of an entrepreneur who takes a bold risk on a new product. It flops. Investors call them foolish. But what if the surgeon had succeeded? What if the product had gone viral? Suddenly the exact same decisions are labeled brilliant, visionary, wise. The only thing that changed was the outcome, not the logic, not the information, not the integrity. This bias isn't just unfair, It's corrosive. It punishes people for being brave. It teaches you to judge yourself by results rather than reasoning. It makes you afraid to take intelligent risks, because you know if things go badly, everyone, including you, will forget how hard the choice really was. And it teaches all the wrong lessons. When outcome becomes the only measure of quality, you start optimizing for results instead of thinking. You chase certainty. You avoid blame. You stop asking, was this the best choice with what I knew at the time? And start asking, how do I make sure no one calls me stupid if this goes badly? It's a form of self-protection that kills growth. And it's everywhere. In parenting, when your child gets hurt and you think, I should never have let them try. In relationships, when you say, I should have known they'd leave, just because they did. In leadership, when you make a bold decision, it fails, and everyone forgets how supportive they were before the outcome came in. The brain does this because it wants causality. It wants a neat story. It wants to believe that good choices lead to good outcomes, and bad ones to bad endings. That way it can feel safe. It can pretend the world is predictable. But life isn't linear. It's foggy, messy, conditional. Decisions are made in the dark, with incomplete information, emotional weight, competing priorities, and time pressure. You don't know how things will play out. You can't. That's not failure. That's being alive. So how do you escape the outcome bias? You shift your focus from results to reasoning. When something fails, ask, was the logic sound? Were the assumptions valid? Was it the right choice based on what I knew then, not what I know now? When something succeeds, resist the temptation to assume it was genius. Ask instead, was I lucky? Did I ignore risk and just get away with it? This doesn't mean outcomes don't matter. They do. But they shouldn't rewrite history. They shouldn't blind you to the quality of the decision itself. You must learn to respect the process, to honor thoughtful risk, to forgive yourself for doing your best in uncertain terrain, to accept that sometimes good decisions hurt. Sometimes they end badly. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you tried in a world that guarantees nothing. And when you learn this, really learn it, you begin to lead yourself differently. You stop blaming your past self for outcomes they couldn't predict. You stop punishing others for mistakes they couldn't control. You stop chasing perfection and start chasing wisdom. Because in the end, the most powerful question isn't did it work? It's did I choose with clarity, courage, and care, when the outcome was still unknown. That's how you build real confidence. Not by getting everything right, but by learning to stand in the fog and choose anyway. The hindsight illusion. You knew it was coming. That breakup. That failure. That collapse. You say, I should have seen it. You believe you did see it. And now, with everything laid out behind you like a finished novel, you say the ending was obvious. Predictable. Meant to happen. But it wasn't. You just rewrote the past. This is the hindsight illusion. And it deceives you more than you realize. The hindsight illusion is your brain's tendency to look back on events and believe they were more predictable, more inevitable, more knowable than they actually were. It tells you that you always knew what would happen, even if, in truth, you were confused, uncertain, and blind to the outcome at the time. It's not memory. It's reconstruction. Your brain doesn't store perfect timelines. It stores fragments. And when it fills in the gaps, it uses the present to repaint the past. You lost the job? Of course, it was obvious they were going to let you go. The market crashed. Well, everyone saw the signs. Right. You got sick. You should have rested. You should have noticed the symptoms. You say these things not because you're honest, but because your brain needs the past to make sense. It can't tolerate chaos. So it turns uncertainty into inevitability. It turns surprise into foresight. And in doing so, it gives you the illusion that you understood all along. But you didn't. Because if the outcome had been different, if that relationship had worked out, if that decision had gone the other way, your brain would have explained that as inevitable too. That's the trick. The narrative always feels true, because your memory bends to the outcome. This illusion has been studied. In one experiment, participants were asked to predict the outcome of a historical event. Afterward, once they were told the actual result, They claimed they always thought that would happen, even when their earlier predictions said otherwise. Once the answer is revealed, the mind acts like it was never a mystery. You didn't just learn the outcome. You absorbed it. And now you can't imagine a world where it wasn't always obvious. This matters more than you think. Because hindsight doesn't just change your memory. It changes your judgment. You become harsher with others. You say, they should have seen it coming. You blame leaders for not preparing. You blame friends for ignoring signs. You blame yourself for being naive. But at the time, there were no signs. There were only noise, doubt, complexity, and choices made in fog, not clarity. Hindsight turns you into a prophet after the fact. It convinces you that failure was obvious, that risk was foolish, that success was guaranteed. And that illusion robs you of compassion. Compassion for others. And for your own past self. Because you forget what it was like not to know. You forget what it was like to stand at the edge of something with no map. To make a decision when the future was still unwritten. To guess, and live with the consequences. The hindsight illusion paints history in clean lines. But real life is scribbled in uncertainty. It's full of paths not taken, warnings misread, signals drowned in noise. When you look back, you see the path that was. You forget the 1,000 other paths that almost were. And yet, this illusion has a purpose. It helps you build coherence. It helps you tell stories. It lets you believe that the past led to now, that it all made sense, somehow. It gives you continuity. And sometimes, even closure. But when you start using hindsight to rewrite your own agency, to say, I should have known, I was stupid, I ignored the obvious, you're punishing yourself for being human. You're expecting your past self to have had the clarity of your current perspective. That's not wisdom. That's distortion. True wisdom is remembering what it felt like before you knew. The hesitation, the hope, the fear, the chaos of real-time decision-making. And respecting the version of you that chose anyway. Even if the choice ended in loss. Even if the outcome wasn't what you hoped for. Because that version of you was navigating fog, not hindsight. And they deserve grace, not critique. So what can you do? You can start by questioning the voice that says, I knew it all along. You can ask, did I really? Did I have perfect clarity? Or did I just learn to explain the outcome once it arrived? You can pause before judging others too. Because no one knows the ending at the beginning. We all live in uncertainty. We all guess. We all revise the story after it's told. But the ones who grow, they're not the ones who claim to have always known. They're the ones who admit they didn't, and learned anyway. That's the hindsight illusion. It rewrites chaos as clarity, surprise as inevitability. But the truth was always Messier. And remembering that is the first step toward real understanding. The threat amplifier. You feel a tightening in your chest. A noise in the distance. A look on someone's face. Something changes, subtle, invisible, and your body reacts before you even understand why. The heart speeds up. Muscles tense. Thoughts race. You brace yourself, because something must be wrong. Something must be coming. And the more you feel it, the more convinced you become. But what if the feeling isn't the signal? What if it's the distortion? This is the threat amplifier, a hidden reflex in your brain that takes small risks and inflates them into imminent danger. A whisper becomes a scream. A shadow becomes a threat. And worst of all, the urgency of the feeling makes it feel true. Not because the danger is real, but because the sensation is loud. Your brain evolved to keep you alive, not comfortable. And that means detecting danger fast, before it's fully understood. It would rather give you 100 false alarms than miss the one real threat. This worked when the threats were predators in the dark, cliffs beneath your feet, or rival tribes approaching. But today, that same system is constantly scanning emails, facial expressions, silence in texts, news headlines, subtle tones in someone's voice, and tagging them as threats. And once something feels like a threat, it grows. That's the amplifier. You don't just sense danger, you begin to search for it. You hyperfocus on worst-case scenarios. You replay conversations, hunting for hidden meanings. You imagine disasters, betrayals, humiliations. Your body reacts the same way it would if there was a tiger in the room, even though all you did was open a message, hear a pause, or notice someone looked away while you were speaking. But here's what you need to understand. Urgency is not accuracy. Your nervous system doesn't care about truth. It cares about speed. So when it detects uncertainty, it fills the gap with fear. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to protect you. Assume the worst, it says. You'll survive if you're wrong. And that assumption becomes reality. You avoid the call. You cancel the plan. You shut down emotionally. You prepare for pain that hasn't come, and sometimes never will. But your body lives through it anyway. Your heart can't tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. If it feels dangerous, it prepares to survive. And survival is exhausting. The threat amplifier doesn't only distort danger, it erases nuance. It makes everything feel binary, safe or unsafe, trusted or betrayed, good or bad. You lose the ability to sit in ambiguity. You demand answers, certainty, proof. Because the moment you feel fear, your brain narrows. It moves from curiosity to control. And this doesn't just affect you, it affects how you see others. Someone's delay in replying becomes rejection. A neutral expression becomes judgment. A friend's mistake becomes betrayal. You're not being paranoid. You're being protective. But that protection comes at a cost. You see people not as they are, but as potential sources of harm. Your world becomes sharp, fast, reactive. And over time, that becomes your reality. But here's what's even more dangerous. The more often the threat amplifier is triggered, the more sensitive it becomes. Like a volume dial stuck too high, it begins to overreact to smaller and smaller signals. What once would have rolled off your back now spirals into panic. What once felt like uncertainty now feels like a trap. And because it feels so urgent, you believe it must be right. But it's not. Your mind is giving you a false signal. And the moment you believe urgency equals truth, you lose your ability to step back, to pause, to question. You become a passenger in a car you no longer control. So what can you do? You don't silence the threat amplifier by ignoring it. You acknowledge it. You say, I feel fear right now. That doesn't mean I'm in danger. You separate feeling unsafe from being unsafe. You ask yourself, what is the actual evidence here? What story am I telling myself? What else could this mean? You slow down the process. You give your thinking mind a chance to catch up with your reacting body. And over time, with practice, the volume starts to lower. You begin to see threats as possibilities, not certainties. You learn to sit with discomfort instead of leaping to conclusions. You reclaim the moments between stimulus and response, the space where your real self lives. Because the world is uncertain. People are imperfect. Misunderstandings happen. And yes, sometimes danger is real. But most of the time, what you're feeling is not danger. It's anticipation of pain. A habit of defense. A ghost of past wounds showing up in the present. The threat amplifier is not your enemy. It's your body's way of trying to keep you alive. But when it goes unchecked, it keeps you from truly living. So next time fear rises fast, and everything feels urgent, don't run. Don't shut down. Just pause. Breathe. Look again. You might realize the monster wasn't there. Just the echo of one that used to be. The binary filter. You hear a statement, and your mind reacts. Yes or no. Right or wrong. Good or evil. Safe or dangerous. Without realizing it, you've already placed it in a category. A box. A side. This is the binary filter, a mental shortcut that simplifies complexity into extremes. That collapses the gray into black or white. That gives you a sense of certainty, at the cost of truth. The brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It wants clarity. It wants order. And in a chaotic world, the fastest way to feel in control is to divide everything into two, us versus them. Agree or disagree. Hero or villain. Success or failure. But reality isn't built that way. Reality lives in the blur. You were not born with the binary filter. You developed it. It's efficient, fast, comfortable. When you scroll through headlines, hear an argument, witness a decision, you instantly judge. Because sitting with ambiguity takes time. It takes energy. And most of all, it takes humility. Binary thinking is tempting because it feels like strength. It says, I know where I stand. It says, I don't hesitate. But often, it's not strength. It's fear. Fear of being unsure. Of not knowing. Of admitting that the world is more complicated than you want it to be. We do it in politics. You're either on our side, or you're wrong. In social justice, you're either woke or blind. In morality, you're either pure or corrupt. But most people, most real people, are a tangled mix of ideas, contradictions, and shifting beliefs. No one fits entirely on one side. But the binary filter flattens them. It strips the nuance. It dehumanizes. And the scariest part? It feels good. Binary thinking provides certainty. And certainty is addictive. It lets you avoid the discomfort of, I don't know. Of, it depends. Of, maybe both are true. You see it in relationships. One argument, and suddenly they're toxic. One mistake, and they're a liar. One disagreement, and they're not who you thought they were. But people are not binary. They're stories in motion. And to freeze them in one frame is to erase everything that came before, and everything that might come after. Even with yourself, the binary filter takes hold. You fail, and now you're a failure. You succeed, and now you're invincible. But identity doesn't live in the extremes. It lives in process, in contradiction, in becoming. And yet, we crave labels. Because once something has a label, we can stop thinking about it. We can file it away. That person's difficult. That view is dangerous. That idea is stupid. But what if that label is just a defense against curiosity? The binary filter destroys curiosity. It kills conversation. It turns every disagreement into a battle. Every discussion into a verdict. It makes you ask, which side are you on? Instead of, what are you seeing that I'm not? And in an age of algorithms, this filter becomes more dangerous. Because everything is optimized to reinforce your side. Your feed shows you confirmation. Your group praises your takes. Your reality becomes a fortress of sameness, and every outside thought feels like an attack. But the truth doesn't live inside that fortress. It lives in the uncomfortable in-between. In the questions without answers. In the tension between opposing ideas that both hold fragments of something real. Think of a controversial topic you hold a strong opinion on. Now ask, could the opposite side have any point? Could there be merit buried inside what you've dismissed? That's not weakness. That's intellectual bravery. Because the most dangerous minds are not the ones who think differently. They're the ones who think only in absolutes. Who believe complexity is betrayal. Who'd rather be wrong with certainty than right with doubt. And that's what the binary filter steals from you, the ability to hold complexity. To say, I disagree with you, and I'm still listening. To say, this issue is broken, but here's where it works. To say, I don't know yet. And that's okay. There is power in nuance. There is strength in hesitation. There is intelligence in saying, it's not that simple. But simplicity sells. Certainty rallies crowds. Extremes get clicks. And so the binary filter wins. Until you choose to remove it. Until you choose to step into the gray. Because that's where humanity lives. That's where truth hides, not in black, not in white, but in the stormy middle. The place where ideas collide and grow. Where understanding begins. Where people are more than one thing. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, this is right, that is wrong, pause. Ask, what's missing here? Not to abandon conviction, but to ground it in awareness. Not to surrender belief, but to free it from blindness. Because if your truth can't survive complexity, maybe it's not truth at all. The recency bias. You make decisions. Constantly. What to believe. Who to trust. What path to follow. And you think those decisions are built from a lifetime of knowledge, wisdom accumulated through experience, logic, and perspective. But what if that's not true? What if, without realizing it, your brain gives unfair weight to whatever you heard last, not what's most important, most reliable, or most true? This is the recency bias, a cognitive glitch where your mind overvalues the most recent piece of information, even when older data is more accurate, more relevant, or more meaningful. It's the illusion that what's freshest must also be what's most real. And it happens all the time. You watch a video that shifts your opinion. You read a comment, and suddenly your confidence shakes. You see a news headline, and it overwrites years of belief. You feel like your worldview changed overnight. But it didn't. It was nudged, not by reason, but by order. Not by content, but by timing. Here's how it works. Your brain is a pattern detection machine. But it's also a survival engine. And in the wild, the latest signals often mattered most. The rustle in the bushes now, the shifting winds now, those were cues for danger or opportunity. Evolution trained us to favor the most recent signal over old ones. Because in nature, what's recent is often urgent. But in the modern world, that instinct misfires. A teacher may remember the last few assignments more clearly than the full semester. A manager might rate an employee based on this week's performance, ignoring months of excellence. A voter might change their entire opinion based on a single scandal or speech that occurred yesterday, forgetting the policy record that came before it. The recency bias tricks you into mistaking visibility for truth. It's not that the new information is better. It's that it's louder in your mind, because it's closer. And it affects your memory, too. When asked to recall a list of items, people consistently remember the first few, and the last few. The middle disappears. Psychologists call this the serial position effect, with recency playing a dominant role. In essence, your mind privileges the tail end of experience, even when it shouldn't. But it goes deeper. Imagine you've been researching a topic for days, reading studies, analyzing data. Then someone posts a flashy, emotionally charged claim. It's simple, clear, immediate, and though it contradicts everything you've learned, it sticks. You find yourself quoting it, thinking about it, doubting yourself. That's not truth-winning. That's recency hijacking cognition. And it's dangerous. Because in a world of non-stop input, social media, 24-hour news, infinite scroll, the latest voice is always the loudest. And the result? Your beliefs become fragile, constantly bending to whatever you saw most recently, regardless of substance. It also affects emotion. You might feel your whole day was ruined because the last hour was hard, even if the rest was peaceful. You might leave a movie thinking it was terrible because the final scene disappointed you, even if the first 90 minutes moved you deeply. Recency distorts your overall perception, replacing wholeness with whatever happened last. So how do you fight it? First, pause before reacting to new input. Ask, is this actually more relevant, or just more recent? Did this information override my opinion because it's stronger, or because it's newer? Second, retrace the timeline. Zoom out. What did I believe before this? What long-term evidence supports that view? What patterns emerge over time, not just in the moment? Third, notice emotional shifts. If a recent event triggered fear, anger, or elation, ask whether that emotion deserves to reframe the entire experience. Maybe it's valid. Or maybe it's a spike, not a signal. And finally, record your thinking. Write down what you believe before new input. That way you have a stable foundation. A version of yourself untouched by the newest noise. It gives you something to come back to. Because recency bias is not evil. It's not weakness. It's instinct. But unexamined instinct can lead you away from clarity and toward manipulation. The latest voice is often the most confident, the most emotional, the most shareable. But that doesn't make it the most true. Truth lives in patterns, in repeated data, in context, in time. So don't let your worldview be rewritten by what happened yesterday. Don't let the last thing you heard silence everything else you've learned. Sometimes, the most recent idea isn't a revelation. It's a distraction. And if you want to stay rooted in truth, you'll need to see beyond the present echo. Because clarity doesn't come from the latest thought. It comes from the deepest one. The self-centering loop, You walk into a room and someone goes quiet. You send a message and get no reply. You notice two people laughing and feel a twinge. Were they laughing at me? It's subtle, but relentless. The assumption that you are somehow at the center of every interaction, every silence, every shift in mood. This is the self-centering loop. A quiet, unconscious distortion where your mind pulls every event into orbit around you. It's not narcissism. It's not arrogance. It's something more fragile, something rooted in the architecture of human consciousness. The belief, often unnoticed, that you must be the reason. That your presence is the cause. That you are the axis of explanation for what happens around you. And it's an illusion. But it feels real because of how your brain works. Your consciousness is the only one you ever directly experience. Every glance, every delay, every coincidence is filtered through your nervous system. Your thoughts, your fears, your memories. So when something happens, you interpret it in relation to you. You become the gravitational center in a solar system of imagined implications. Someone is quiet. It must be about you. Someone's cold. You must have done something wrong. Someone's upset. You replay every word you said, scanning for guilt. But here's the truth. Most of what happens around you has nothing to do with you. The world is full of people living complex, overlapping stories. Everyone is carrying invisible weights. Everyone is caught in their own loops. Their silence might be about grief. Their laughter might be relief. Their delay might be exhaustion. You are not the reference point of their lives. But to your brain, it feels like you are. This self-centering isn't inherently selfish. It's developmental. Infants begin life believing they are the cause of everything. That crying changes the world. That attention flows to them by design. And some part of that never quite leaves. The adult mind retains a fragile echo of childhood ego, the part that thinks, it's happening because of me. Even when it isn't. And here's where the loop begins. You assume it's about you. That assumption generates anxiety. That anxiety demands resolution. So you seek confirmation. You analyze. You self-blame. You ask others for reassurance. And in doing so, you deepen the loop, turning everything into a mirror, even when the world was never reflecting you. You begin to shrink people's autonomy. Their inner lives. Their independence. Not out of cruelty, but out of confusion. You mistake your role in the story. You forget that you are not the author of everyone else's plotline. The self-centering loop is subtle, but exhausting. It leads to overthinking, to guilt that doesn't belong to you, to an invisible sense of pressure, as if you must manage everyone's emotions just because you happen to be nearby. It also distorts intimacy. When you believe others are always reacting to you, you start walking on emotional eggshells. You become overly cautious, overly apologetic, or overly controlling. You forget that people can have bad moods that have nothing to do with your value. That discomfort can exist in a room without being your fault. So how do you break the loop? You start by noticing when you're narrating the world through your own imagined impact. You hear silence and pause. Is this about me, or just something I don't understand yet? You feel tension and ask, what if this has nothing to do with me at all? You practice decentering, a radical humility that says, I am not the main character in everyone's story. I am a character. And sometimes, I'm not even in the scene. This isn't about self-erasure. It's about realism. Because paradoxically, when you release the illusion that everything revolves around you, you become more free to actually connect. You can listen without defense. Apologize without collapse. Exist without needing constant validation. You stop interpreting every twitch of the world as a commentary on your worth. And that is freedom. To walk into a room without assuming judgment. To let people be complex without dragging your ego into their behavior. To experience a moment without placing yourself at its center. You begin to see the world more clearly, because you're no longer fogging the glass with your reflection. And you realize, the less it's about you, the more you can finally be yourself. The attribution error. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You feel your pulse rise. Your jaw tightens. You think, what a jerk. What an arrogant, careless, selfish person. But 5 minutes later, You're the one swerving across lanes. Late for a meeting. Distracted by a message. You whisper to yourself, I didn't mean to. I had no choice. It was just one mistake. This is the attribution error. And it's not just a habit. It's a built-in distortion of how we see others and ourselves. Also known as the fundamental attribution error, this is your brain's tendency to explain someone else's bad behavior by blaming their character, while explaining your own bad behavior by blaming circumstance. When they act poorly, it's because they're bad. When you act poorly, it's because things were difficult. The same action. Two different stories. And the scary part? You do it automatically. Without thinking. You see someone snap at a barista, and assume they're rude. But when you snap at someone, you were tired, stressed, pushed too far. You see someone miss a deadline, and assume they're lazy. But when you miss one, it was an emergency. Something came up. No one understands what you're dealing with. You assign disposition to others, and context to yourself. It's not selfish. It's human. Your brain has limited access. You live inside your own mind, so you see every reason behind your actions. The hesitation, the doubt, the struggle, the apology you wanted to say but didn't. But with others, you only see the result. The surface. The impact. And so you fill in the gaps. With judgment. This error doesn't just distort small moments. It shapes relationships. Destroys empathy. Fuels conflict. You argue with a friend and decide they're selfish, manipulative, cold. You don't consider what they're carrying. What their day looked like. What fear drove their words. You don't ask, what context am I missing? Because the attribution error doesn't want questions. It wants certainty. It wants someone to blame. It wants to feel morally superior. And it whispers, you are reasonable. They are flawed. Even though, if the roles were reversed, you demand understanding. This is how families fracture. How co-workers turn on each other. How strangers online become enemies. It's easy to hate someone when you reduce them to a single action. A single word. A single moment. But people are never just one moment. And yet, that's how we often treat them. This gets even more dangerous when power is involved. We judge those below us more harshly, assuming they're lazy, disobedient, weak. But when those with power make mistakes, we excuse them, saying the job is hard, the pressure immense. The attribution error doesn't distribute equally. It flows in the direction of ego. It protects you, at the cost of them. But the most tragic part, it isolates you. Because when you assume others are broken, you stop reaching out. You stop listening. You stop seeing them as human. And when you make a mistake, the guilt lingers, because deep down, you suspect no one else will give you the grace you never gave them. So how do we break it? It starts with one question. If I had done what they just did, how would I explain it? Ask that before you judge. Before you label. Before you turn someone's entire identity into a single behavior. Because most of the time, people are reacting to pressure you don't see. Pain you weren't there for. Stories you'll never know. And maybe they are careless. Maybe they are selfish. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're just tired. Lost. Trying. Just like you. The attribution error wants you to simplify people. But you're not simple. So don't make others small just to feel safe. You can still hold people accountable. But accountability without empathy becomes cruelty. And self-forgiveness without humility becomes blindness. It's not about excusing every action. It's about balancing the lens. Seeing both character and circumstance. In them. And in you. That's the attribution error. It tells you you're better than them. But the truth? We're all just navigating this life, imperfectly, urgently, and in the dark. So maybe today, give someone the understanding you'd want if you were the one in their place. Because tomorrow, you will be. The familiarity mirage. You hear it again. And again. And again. Maybe it's a phrase. A belief. A slogan. A piece of advice. At first, you don't think much of it. But over time, as the repetition sinks in, it starts to feel true. Not because it's backed by evidence. Not because you've tested it, but because it keeps showing up, over and over, until your brain starts whispering, "If it weren't true, why would I keep hearing it?" This is the familiarity mirage, the illusion that something is accurate, valuable, or trustworthy simply because it's familiar. The mind's quiet tendency to confuse repetition with truth. And it governs more of your reality than you realize. Your brain isn't built to calculate truth every time it hears something. That takes effort, energy, focus. Instead, it uses shortcuts. One of those shortcuts is fluency, how easily something comes to mind. If an idea feels smooth, effortless, recognizable, your brain interprets it as more likely to be true. Not because it is, but because it feels that way. So when you hear a claim once, you might question it. Hear it 5 times, and it starts to sound credible. Hear it 50 times, and it starts to feel obvious. This is how advertising works. How propaganda works. How misinformation spreads. Repetition bypasses skepticism. It burrows into your subconscious until the line between familiarity and truth blurs. This isn't stupidity. This is cognition. Repetition makes your brain process faster. And fast feels safe. Fast feels right. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect, the tendency to believe a statement is true the more often you hear it, even when it's false. You've seen this in action. A myth repeated in childhood becomes personal fact. A biased headline repeated online becomes accepted narrative. An assumption repeated by peers becomes group reality. And this isn't just about big, external ideas. It happens inside you too. Think about the things you tell yourself on repeat. I'm not good at this. People always leave. I mess things up. These aren't facts. But they're familiar. And familiarity makes them feel factual. You've thought them so often, they no longer feel like opinions. They feel like truth. But they're not. They're grooves in the record. Echoes on loop. A mirage you've mistaken for a map. Even your preferences can be hijacked by familiarity. You hear a song you didn't love at first. But after enough plays, it becomes a favorite. Not because it changed, but because your brain stopped resisting. The friction wore off. Repetition bred comfort, and comfort bred attachment. The same thing happens with people. The more often you see someone, the more likely you are to like them. It's called the mere exposure effect. Familiar faces feel safer. Predictable voices feel trustworthy. Not because they've earned it, but because they're present. Repeated. Easy to digest. And here's where the danger lies. In a world flooded with content, repetition is no longer a side effect, it's a weapon. Algorithms reward it. Influencers exploit it. Politicians use it. The louder an idea becomes, the more likely it is to be believed. Not because it's examined, but because it's everywhere. And everywhere starts to feel like evidence. So how do you protect yourself? First, by slowing down the reaction. When you hear something that feels obviously true, ask yourself, is this true because it's familiar? Or because it's been proven? That pause alone can cut through the illusion. Second, you actively seek new perspectives. Your brain favors what's already stored. So introduce variety. Different voices. Contradictory views. Not to agree with them, but to challenge the repetition loop. The more your brain learns to hold multiple ideas, the less easily it falls for the smoothness of the most familiar one. And finally, you examine your internal messages. The things you repeat to yourself, especially the painful ones, need questioning. Because just like external slogans, inner beliefs become illusions through sheer repetition. When you hear that voice say, I can't, or I always fail, ask, would I believe this if I heard it for the first time today? Often, the answer is no. The familiarity mirage doesn't just mislead you, it shapes you. It builds your identity on what's been repeated, not what's been discovered. It makes the loudest idea feel like the wisest. The most common path feel like the safest. The old belief feel like the most correct. But truth doesn't always feel smooth. Growth doesn't always sound familiar. And just because something echoes, doesn't mean it's real. So next time something feels true, ask yourself not just what it is, but why you believe it. If the only answer is, because I've heard it a lot, That might not be truth you're seeing. That might be the mirage. The status quo bias. You tell yourself you're rational. That when you make decisions, you weigh the options carefully. That if something better comes along, you'll take it. But deep down, beneath logic, beneath intention, there's a quiet force pulling you back. Whispering, stay where you are. Don't change. Don't risk it. This is the status quo bias, a hidden instinct that makes the familiar feel safe, even when it's failing you. You see it in everyday choices. You stick with the same brand, not because it's better, but because it's what you've always used. You stay at a job that drains you because leaving feels uncertain. You remain in routines that don't nourish you, friendships that no longer fit, beliefs you've outgrown, because changing them would mean stepping into the unknown. And the unknown feels like danger. The status quo bias isn't laziness. It's evolutionary psychology. In a world where uncertainty once meant death, doing what you did yesterday was a survival strategy. If you lived through it once, it was safe enough to repeat. And so your brain began wiring comfort to familiarity, even if familiarity brought pain. But now, that wiring backfires. Because we live in a world where change is constant. Where adaptation is essential. Yet the bias remains. You default to what is, and instinctively fear what could be. You convince yourself that moving forward might make things worse, so you stay exactly where you are, even if it's slowly killing you. And you justify it. You say, it's not that bad. At least I know what to expect. Maybe things will improve. But these aren't reasons. They're rationalizations, defenses built by fear masquerading as logic. The status quo bias hijacks your decision-making. In experiments, people choose default options, even when better alternatives are right in front of them. Medical patients stick with old treatments. Consumers reject better products. Voters cling to policies they no longer believe in. All because change feels harder than it is. Even when presented with clear evidence, the bias persists. Not because the facts are wrong, but because the feeling of disruption is more powerful than the logic of improvement. You see it in your own life. You hesitate to end something that's clearly broken, simply because it's been part of your identity. You fear starting something new, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the version of you that's been comfortable. And comfort isn't the same as peace. Sometimes, it's just well-practiced pain. You stay in a relationship out of habit. You delay a dream because the routine feels safer. You resist a belief shift, not because it's false, but because it would mean unlearning what once felt right. And in all of this, the status quo bias wins. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. And familiarity is seductive. But here's what the bias hides from you. Staying still is not neutral. It's not passive. It's a choice, with consequences. Inaction has a cost. Not deciding is still a decision. And often, it's the one that steals your future the most quietly. Think of all the chances you didn't take. The apologies you didn't make. The new paths you never explored. Not because they were wrong, but because they were different. That's what the status quo bias fears most, difference. Not danger. Not failure. Just change. It confuses unfamiliarity with risk. But they're not the same. What if leaving is safer than staying? What if quitting is smarter than holding on? What if the unknown isn't a cliff, but a door? The only way to know is to walk through. And yet, the bias resists. It paints the current state as normal, and anything else as a threat. But normal isn't always right. And tradition isn't always wise. Sometimes, the deepest progress comes from breaking something stable. The status quo bias doesn't want you to ask hard questions. It wants autopilot, routine, repetition. It wants you to believe that who you've been is who you must remain. But that's a lie. You're allowed to pivot, to evolve, to change your mind, even if it upsets the pattern. Especially if it does. The truth is, growth begins where the status quo ends. But to reach it, you must betray your comfort. You must defy the voice that says, "Don't rock the boat." Because sometimes, the boat needs to be rocked. Sometimes, stillness is just a slower kind of drowning. So ask yourself, are you staying because it's right? Or because it's easier? Is the life you're living chosen or inherited? Is this job, this belief, this relationship yours, or just what was handed to you? Because change is not the enemy. Fear is. And the status quo bias is fear, dressed up as reason, dressed up as loyalty, as patience, as stability. But at its core, it is a refusal to grow. So break it. Not recklessly, but bravely. Step out of the circle. Let the familiar tremble. Let the uncertain breathe. Because everything you want, everything you're becoming, everything worth building, lives just beyond the edge of what you already know. The completion fantasy. You tell yourself it's close. Just a little more. One more achievement. One more breakthrough. One more clean day, perfect week, complete checklist. Then, finally, you'll arrive. Life will click into place. The noise will quiet. The uncertainty will stop clawing at you. And you'll be whole. This is the completion fantasy, the haunting illusion that there is a moment in the future when you'll finally feel finished. When your past will make perfect sense, your purpose will feel solid, and your rest will feel earned. It whispers that all your effort, all your becoming, is building toward a clear, final state of clarity, of peace. But that moment never comes. Because it doesn't exist. Completion is not a destination. It's a mirage, constructed by a brain that craves resolution more than truth. You imagine the future version of yourself as calm, wise, self-assured. You imagine the loose ends will be tied, the questions answered, the insecurities quieted. You think, if I can just fix this one part of me, everything else will settle. But it won't. Because life is not a novel. You are not a story with a clean arc. You are a process, fluid, layered, recursive. And every time you approach a milestone, the finish line moves. Every time you complete something, new complexity opens. That's not failure. That's growth. But the fantasy says otherwise. The fantasy says that happiness is later. And so, you live in deferral. You postpone joy, rest, softness, until things make sense. Until the plan comes together. Until the self you're building is finally stable. But stability is not permanent. It is rented, not owned. And the moment you reach it, something changes. And you start chasing again. This is why people who reach their goals often feel hollow. They graduate, get the job, the relationship, the body, the house, and feel an emptiness they weren't warned about. Because the mind was hooked on the idea that this would be the moment. The click. The arrival. But no click comes. Just the same thoughts, in a different room. The completion fantasy tells you that integration is a milestone. That one day, the traumas will resolve, the patterns will dissolve, and your past will stop echoing. But healing is not a line you cross. It's a rhythm you dance with. Some days you soar. Other days, the old shadows return. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're alive. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a self to be met, again and again, in changing forms. So what happens when you let go of the fantasy? At first, grief. Because for years, it was your compass. The dream that one day, everything would click. That the mess would transform into a masterpiece with a final brushstroke. Letting go of that is not easy. It means accepting that life will always include some unknown. Some confusion. Some ache. But after grief, freedom. Because without the burden of arrival, you can begin to show up for the moment you're in. You can build not toward a perfect self, but a present one. You can celebrate progress that's real, even if it's incomplete. You can stop trying to finish the story, and start learning how to read the chapter you're in. You can feel peace not as a destination, but as a practice. This doesn't mean you stop striving. Ambition is beautiful. So is healing. So is vision. But the work shifts. You stop asking, when will I be done? And start asking, how can I be present with who I am now, even as I change? You stop treating joy as a reward for perfection, and start seeing it as a companion for the imperfect path. There is no moment in the future when life will hand you a certificate of completion. No inner committee that will say, you did it. You're finally enough. That voice has to come from you. Not because everything is solved, but because you chose to honor yourself anyway. And when you do that, something quiet happens. The anxiety softens. The urgency relaxes. The noise fades. Not because you reached the end, but because you finally realized there isn't one. There's only this breath, this choice, this becoming. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.